to order the February 25th POSAC Advisory Committee meeting. And I have two, well, I'll tell you what, let's first do roll call. And we'll start with that. Tony Lewis.
Here.
Scott Miller.
Here.
Good evening, Scott. And Oberchain.
Here.
Good evening. And Heather Williams.
Present.
Hi, Heather. Jen, absent. Paula.
I'm here.
Trace.
I'm here.
Stephen.
Here.
Good evening. And Jim Krug here. Thank you all for coming tonight. Just a couple announcements. One is Paula's been kind enough at around 8 o'clock. I'm going to jump out and go get COVIDized and ask Paula to fill in for the last 45 minutes or so. Jen is out, will not be with us this evening. Her poor excuse is she had a child this week, and I think a boy, if I recall correctly. And so it was a little premature, so Jen will not be joining us tonight. For those of you listening online, I know it's an important issue. I got stopped at 7:10 at the bakery at King Supers in Lafayette on Sunday morning, and I was asked my views on composting. We're not going to discuss, it's not on the agenda tonight. We're just going to stick to the agenda items tonight. We have a pretty full information agenda tonight. I'm going to ask the staff, please allow some time at the end of your presentation for questions so we don't get too backed up. Those of you online who would like to comment about the compost issue, I will read this twice. If you'd like, you can contact at some point down the road, probably POSAC will have a hearing, and of course the commissioners. But if you want, you can send a comment to the commissioners at boco.org/compost-facility. I'll read that again. BOCO, BOCO.org/compost-facility. So, like I said, we will not be discussing that issue. I know it's hot on people's minds, and but that would be down the road a piece. Tonight, we have a very full agenda. Going to start with the real estate division. Janice and team are going to present in sort of three sections, so to speak, and sort of to speed the process up a little bit. I won't go through, she's going to stop in each section and ask if the POSAC members have any questions. I will not read off everybody like I usually do if they have a question. So to sort of speed along, if you have a question, rather than wait to the end, thought it'd be better. They thought, and I agree, be better to break it into three sections, and anybody who wants to will just go to the screen and call on anybody who has a question, and we'll try to get moving forward with that. Fair enough? Yes,
Jim,
please.
I
Yes.
think you skipped over the approval of last month's minutes.
No, I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
Thank you. Like
Yeah.
I said, I wanted to start with just a couple general announcements, then we'll get back to it.
Okay.
Okay. So everybody good with all that? That's all the info piece of it. So, okay, I'm going to come back to the approval of the minutes. So at this time, the chair will entertain a motion on the January 28th minutes.
I'll move to approve the minutes of January 28th.
Trace Baker, second.
See? Okay, at this time, is there any additions, corrections, or conversations, discussions anybody wishes to have? All right, all those in favor say aye.
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 Those opposed, like sign. Motion approved. Thank you. Janice, are you set to go?
Yes, I am.
Please begin.
All right. Good evening, POSAC. I'm Janice Wisman, the Real Estate Division Manager, and I'm going to start a presentation that's been pre-recorded. It starts with 3 slides from Tina Nielsen, who was out of town but was going to try to make it tonight. That is an introductory section to a 3-part presentation. So as soon as she's done with her 3 slides, it will roll to my section, which is about the general real estate strategic plan. And then I'm going to try to pause it so that you could ask any questions of that section that you like. Then we'll go to Melissa Arnold, who's our conservation easement program manager, who will talk in the pre-recorded presentation about the conservation easement program. And then we'll try to pause it again for questions and then go to Sean Reynolds for the project management and design section. So here we go. I'm going to try to share my screen, and then I will get the presentation started. It's easier to start it after it shares. All right, here we go.
Good evening, POSAC members. I'm Tina Nielsen, and I'm here to introduce tonight's strategic plan presentation. The Parks and Open Space Department has been engaged in an internal strategic planning process that started in 2019. At your January meeting, Ernst Strenga gave an overview of this internal process, including the themes, principles, and how this framework will help inform the department's work going forward. Throughout the remainder of this year, staff from each of our 22 work groups will present an overview of the strategic plan and 2021 SMART objectives. Tonight, you're hearing from the real estate division and the project management and design work group. So before I turn it over to these work groups, I'm going to give just a little bit of background. The pyramid depicted on this slide shows the strategic plan framework we're using. The desired future conditions, or DFC, is the North Star that each group is aiming for over the long term. The goals lay out more detail about what needs to happen in order to reach the DFCs, and the strategies are yet more granular. And finally, each group has determined their objectives for 2021. Objectives are meant to be SMART: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This framework is designed to help each work group find the right balance of work to move them forward and to create accountability. At the end of the presentation, staff will be available for your questions and comments. And now I would like to turn it over to our 3 presenters, Janice Wiseman, Melissa Arnold, and Sean Reynolds.
Hi, I'm Janice Wiseman, Real Estate Division Manager for the department. We have 2 sections to our Real Estate Division Strategic Plan objectives. I'm going to describe the first part, and when I'm done, Melissa Arnold will do the second part. All right, let me start with our desired future condition, which is the ultimate goal. We want all of the real estate interests that the county desires for open space to have been acquired. We don't expect that this will happen anytime soon. We are still acquiring property. We want the values of county open space real estate interests to be protected so that once we buy a piece of property, we can maintain it for open space. And we want to make sure that the data about our real estate interests are maintained and accessible to staff and the public. As you can imagine, all 3 of these pieces take a lot of collaboration, not just among staff in our division and in the department, but with partners and people from other county departments. So under that desired future condition, we have 4 goals. The first, of course, is that we need to know what it is that we want to acquire for open space. So that's where, number 1, we need to determine what's desired. That would be for additional land for open space, irrigation water rights, and any trail connections that we might want to make. The second one is we need to go out and acquire those desired properties from willing landowners. And as you all know, we only work with willing landowners. So that's a very important part of our program. We do not use condemnation and won't use condemnation to acquire any of these interests. And then the third thing we need to do is minimize the third-party takings. Those are the kinds of things you see from us when we come to you with a new utility or a new roadway widening or something like that. We're trying to minimize those takings and issues so that we can maintain those open space values. And then the fourth part of it is about maintaining that real estate data so that we can show the staff and the public what the department's done over its history. So under that first goal, we of course need to know what our priorities are. And we do have information from when the comp plan was first developed back in the 70s. There were long lists of properties and areas of the county, natural landmarks, historic areas, all of those kinds of things that the community wanted us to protect. And we still have a few things from that list. We also have more current data, and we are continuing to get input annually and on a regular basis from staff. We have various staff in a variety of disciplines who are experts in their field, and they know what else we need to acquire to protect additional wildlife habitat or areas that are important for plant ecology purposes, etc. We also visit with you once a year typically at your retreat, where we can talk with you about your ideas for what our priorities should be. And we regularly visit with the Board of County Commissioners and the County Administrator about their priorities and what they'd like to see us acquire for open space. And then we also have a fairly detailed process that we use with the towns and cities in Boulder County. Once a year, we ask them formally in writing to let us know what their priorities are. And then throughout the year and periodically as needed, we visit with them about those priorities and explore partnership opportunities. All of this is to try to help figure out what the last few pieces of the puzzle should be for the county's acquisition program. So also under Goal 1, one of the strategies is to do outreach, which relates more to Goal 2, to actually acquire properties, but it also relates here because if we had a piece of software that would help us track all of these properties, it would also help us track that outreach. So we're hoping to implement new software. We've selected the Locate software that's built on the Salesforce platform, and we've asked IT to install that and support it for us. We were hoping to have gotten that done last year, but with COVID-19 happening, things have been delayed. We don't know if this will happen this year or if we'll just have to keep it on the list until IT can get to it. But we do hope to eventually start using a nice piece of software to help us do that tracking. And then under Goal 2, to actually do the acquisitions, the first thing we have to do is make contact with all of the priority property owners. And those are some that we, as I mentioned, are still on the list from the old days that we have relationships with, but there are quite a few new properties that we haven't yet reached out to landowners to inquire about their interest. So we need to do that, and we need to see if they'd be willing to sell either a conservation easement or a fee title to their property to have it protected for open space. And so we need to begin building those relationships, which will take time. This slide shows you what we already have under contract and one property that we have under letter of intent. So the closings that will happen in 2024, 25, and 26 are ones that the county has had under contract for many years. And then the State Land Board property at Bald Mountain and Heil, they're 2 parcels. We hope to close on this year, but we are still just under letter of intent because the State Land Board is trying to resolve a title issue at Bald Mountain, and they would prefer to sell us both of those properties at the same time. So that's why the closing date is tentative, why we're not yet under contract, and also why we don't yet know what the price will be. So our third goal is about managing the property and maintaining the open space values on them after they've been acquired. So we have an internal oil and gas team that works with operators who need to come on to open space to do maintenance on their oil and gas wells. Of course, everyone understands that we need to keep those wells in safe working conditions. So our team makes sure that the operators can do what they legally need to do and have the right to do, but to do it in a way that minimizes those impacts that can come from big equipment coming onto the property. And then we also have to deal with takings, formerly known as condemnations, by special districts and utility companies for new utilities, or by the Colorado Department of Transportation or the Weld County or others for road widenings that they're doing adjacent to open space where they need to take open space. They do have the right, as you know, to take that property from the county, so we have to accommodate that use, and we work through that process to make sure that the open space funds are reimbursed according to the value of what's being taken. And then we do also get asked about other non-open space uses. Sometimes people want to make private use of open space. say to come in through an open space property to get in something into their backyard. And we can't allow that because that's a private use of open space, but we do have to process those requests and deal with those. So that's why that's on this slide where we're trying to minimize impacts on open space. And then for goal 4, which is about maintaining our data, trying to get it ready to serve up to staff and the public, to educate them and make it available for whatever uses they might have. We do have a land and water information system, or LWIS, we call it Lewis database. And we are asking our IT department again to support some improvements that we have requested to that database that will help us with that effort. And so that ends the general section of the real estate strategic plan objectives. And
Janice, you still there?
I'm still here trying to figure out how to stop sharing for a second.
That's okay.
Okay.
Hey, Janice, well, that I'll start and then throw it to the group. I just have one question, and that is, do we lease any open space for anything other than agriculture?
That's a good question. So the leasing that we do that's into the county comes from the state land board. So those pieces at Baldwin Heil are things that we lease from others. We also have a couple of management agreements where we manage a property out at Dodd Lake for the Audubon Society owns it, but we manage it. And then leasing out for open space, the only two things I can think of, and Eric, please chime in if you think you can think of other ones, are the agriculture and then the ag tenant housing that we do. We do have quite a few houses that we lease.
Okay, thank you. Any other POSAC members have questions?
Yeah, Trace Baker here. Your desired future condition, all real estate interests desired by the county for open space, etc. Does all mean that there is a defined endpoint? Do we know what all is, or will all evolve as new properties become available and are evaluated?
Another good question. We don't know yet what all means. We know what we know today and what we have on the priority list today, but the end is not yet in sight.
Thank you, Janice.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Thank you. Is there any online, Nick? Is there any comments online, questions? Yeah, thank you, Nick. And I'll come back to you all online after the next section as well. So Janice, can you continue, or we'll just go to the next?
And this is a little tricky, so bear with me, but hopefully this will work. So Arnold is going to take over. She's our conservation easement program manager, and she's going to explain to you all of the goals and objectives for our conservation easement program. Thank you.
Good evening, POSAC members. My name is Melissa Arnold, and I'm the Conservation Easement Program Manager. Before I describe our strategic plan objectives for 2021, I'd like to start with a brief overview of the Conservation Easement Program that will provide some context for my presentation. Boulder County holds 847 conservation easements or similar documents, such as restrictive covenants, on private properties in the county and the surrounding area. The development and uses on these properties have been restricted to protect unique conservation values such as agricultural land, natural habitat, and other open space values identified in the comprehensive plan. These properties remain in private ownership, but the county, as holder of these conservation easements, is responsible for stewarding or monitoring them on a regular basis to ensure that the terms of each document are being upheld. Staff schedules regular site visits to the properties with the landowners, walks around to discuss changes, evaluates the conditions of the resources, and just generally ensures that there are no violations during these monitoring visits. The county also has 137 conservation easements that it has conveyed over its open space properties out to other entities, for example, to the city of Longmont. So even though these holders primarily do their own monitoring, the county has agreed to self-monitor and report on some of these properties. Together, this means the county has 990 records for conservation easements and is required to monitor 828 of these. In our program, we have 2 full-time staff members, including myself, who do the bulk of the monitoring, 11 returning volunteers, and occasional assistance from hourly staff. Given this, staff can monitor anywhere from 300 to 350 properties a year out of the 828 that require monitoring. And one last note on monitoring frequency, the county is statutorily required to monitor 108 of its conservation easements annually because they were fully or partially donated. But staff monitors the remaining 720 conservation easements on a 3 to 4 year rotating basis. However, it is an industry standard and best practice to monitor every conservation easement every year. So now I'll turn to the Conservation Easement Program strategic plan. The desired future condition of the Conservation Easement Program reads, the conservation values that each conservation easement, or CE, intends to preserve are protected in partnership with CE landowners. The goals of how we intend to achieve this are 1, prevent and remedy violations on all CE properties. 2, monitor every CE on an annual basis. 3, partner with staff and CE landowners on proactive stewardship activities that maintain or enhance conservation values. And 4, maintain CE stewardship data to serve and educate both staff and the public. So for that first goal, prevent and remedy violations on all CE properties. For properties that we'll be monitoring in 2021, we'll increase our points of contact with CE landowners by reaching out to them a minimum of twice a year. Some landowners are very engaged with us and they respond to our legal notice letters, meet us on site, and they communicate any changes in plans that evolve over the year. And others historically have been less responsive. So one way we'll be increasing touch points in 2021 is by adjusting the content and process for mailing the legal notice letters that let the landowners know that we're coming for a monitoring visit. They'll be more personalized and allow for more ease in scheduling on-site meetings with us. We'll also be reaching back out to those who we did not hear from the first time. Another objective is that we'll be adding more landowner resources to the stewardship newsletter by April of 2021. We created our first newsletter last year in 2020 and mailed it out with the legal notice letters. And we found that it gave landowners a personalized look at the program and our monitoring team and provided them with county-wide resources to help them better manage their land. We had very positive responses to our first issue last year. So this year we plan to increase its content. Another objective is to create an action plan for addressing each violation that's identified in the monitoring season. And then last objective in this goal category is track the state legislative process to ensure that 2021 bills do not adversely impact county conservation easements. The state of Colorado benefits from numerous conservation easements across the state that are held by other organizations, and we often see proposals for new bills or changes to existing ones that can affect all of these easements. So our staff is fortunate to work with the Commissioner's Office and the County Attorney's Office to track this legislative activity, and the county is also a member of a statewide coalition, Keep It Colorado, which helps us to stay abreast of proposals and protect the county's CE interests. So goal number 2, monitor every CE on an annual basis. So staff intends to monitor more conservation easements each year with the goal of reaching an annual monitoring cycle by 2024. And this goal is heavily dependent on staff's ability to secure consistent, dedicated seasonal monitors, given the amount of properties that the county is tasked with monitoring. To accomplish this goal, one objective is for staff to advocate for 3 dedicated seasonal monitors every year. In order for us to monitor all 828 CEs annually, it would take adding 3 seasonal staff members for about 6 months each year, in addition to our volunteers and 2 existing full-time staff members. And this number may increase over time as the county continues to acquire new conservation easement interests every year. We have a dedicated group of 11 returning volunteers, the majority who are from the Volunteer Ranger Corps group at Parks and Open Space. We plan to recruit 4 new volunteers this year for a total of 15, and this should increase the number of properties that the group monitors collectively from about 30 to 40 and perhaps even more. Goal 3, partner with staff and CE landowners on proactive stewardship activities that maintain or enhance conservation values. So part of our desired future condition is to not only prevent issues on conservation easements, but to find ways to partner with those landowners to help them improve the conservation values on their land. Even though CE landowners are ultimately the ones responsible for managing their land, staff can provide expertise and resources where applicable. So one objective is that we'll pilot a conservation easement landowner educational workshop. And this will depend on how COVID restrictions will affect our ability this year to gather outdoors in numbers of 20 or greater. We have a pilot program that is set up and ready to go once we get the green light. And extension staff will be discussing enhancing pollinator habitat, and we'll open the registration to other conservation easement landowners to attend. Another objective is to identify existing management plans in need of updating or creation after each 2021 site visit. Management plans are signed agreements between county staff and the landowner that can help guide and focus the landowner in ways to improve or enhance their property's resources. We look forward to tracking these plans more efficiently and making their review a regular part of our monitoring visit. Goal 4. Maintain CE stewardship data to serve and educate both staff and the public. One objective is to complete 2021 structural improvements to the stewardship database, and this one is pending support from IT. This is the database that our staff uses on a daily basis to track the activity on our 990 conservation easement records. Another objective is to improve data transparency and accessibility by converting hard copy conservation easement program field folders to digital. And we can accomplish this objective if we can get into our office pending COVID restrictions to sort through the 990 field files and scan any unique documents. Lastly, we received some great news at the end of 2020. Our program was one of several at Parks and Open Space that was awarded stewardship funding to help staff achieve some of their strategic plan goals. For the conservation easement program, I'm thrilled to announce that we were awarded $42,140 to hire 2 seasonal stewardship monitors for 6 months in 2021. This will cover their pay and all field and office equipment necessary to do the job. These positions will help us to reach our strategic plan goals of 1, preventing and remedying violations. So with more staff on the ground in 2021, having conversations with more landowners, we'll have the opportunity to catch violations before or right as they occur. And by talking through any plans that the landowners may have, we can help to steer them in the right direction. And these positions will also help us to begin to reach our goal to monitor every CE on an annual basis. So 2 seasonal monitors will allow us to monitor somewhere near 600 conservation easements in 2021. That's about double what we've been able to accomplish in previous years. So the increase in staffing will help us to build stronger landowner relationships. Staff will be spending more time with landowners, answering their questions, touring their properties, and generally, hopefully putting a friendly face to Boulder County as the holder of their easement. And for the many properties that we will be able to visit this year, the conservation values on each property can be improved as staff helps to spot noxious weeds, create or update management plans, and connect landowners with county-wide resources to help them to take care of their land. Stewardship takes time and effort, but done well, it can help to ensure that conservation easement properties remain protected as they were intended, and that the resources on those properties are preserved or enhanced for future generations to be able to enjoy. So I thank you very much for your time and for listening to
Okay.
what we have in store for the conservation easement program. And I look forward to answering any questions that you may have.
Hey, Melissa, this is Jim Krug. Thank you for coming out tonight and presenting. You intrigued me. I have just one question around violations of conservation easements. What's the most consistent or the most frequent violation? And then I guess I would go to the penalty piece of it. Like, I mean, do you lose Netflix for a year? You can't run the Boulder. When you say the violations and penalties, what do those look like?
Yeah, good questions. As far as most frequent kinds of violations that we see, I would say the most frequent things we see that we try to adjust are like invasions of noxious weeds that have gotten to levels that are something that they should control. That's very common. Other times we see people who have put up small little sheds that they think are fine to do, that really, in a lot of cases, they are fine, but they didn't go through the right review processes. And the worry is that sometimes people do place them outside of the building envelopes. We have to work with them to then correct it. Yeah, I would say the violations don't occur across the board, consistently every property we go out to. Sometimes it's things like getting people to work on their prairie dog management and trash accumulation. That can be tricky with farms sometimes, and just ensuring things that are accumulating are related to the agricultural operations. Those are just some of the highlights that stand out to me. One last thing I'll say is that when people do put up, little 80 square foot garden sheds, sometimes they don't think about those truly as structures, and that they do add up, and sometimes they have limits on how much they can have on their property, and people do occasionally have to decommission some smaller structures to get back into compliance.
Yeah, good. Thanks, Melissa. Hey, I'll turn it out to other POSAC members. Other questions?
Did you want me to answer the second part
Oh,
about
I'm sorry. Yeah.
repercussions?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's an excellent question, because I think, at its core, monitoring can be enforcement. We're looking to make sure they're in compliance. But, in the most egregious situations, we can run things up through the county attorney's office, and we rarely have to go to that level where then we have to basically say that they're needing to fix things, or else. And it's on very few occasions gotten litigious, like I think only a couple in the history of Boulder County holding easements. More often than not, and this is the great part about building the relationships, the landowners want to work cooperatively, and people don't want to be in trouble, and a lot of times it's not understanding, which is why we're putting so much emphasis on the education piece. Because as you know, with most things that people get that education up front and the guidance and the relationship, they don't want to misstep and they want to do things right. So.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you. Sorry for being so quick.
Yeah, no problem.
Any other POSAC members' questions?
I have a
A
question.
couple.
Okay, go
Please,
ahead.
Stephen,
No.
go ahead.
Paula, go ahead.
Okay. First one is, you talked about pending legislation. Is there anything currently being discussed that would affect conservation easements?
Not currently. There is conservation easement legislation that is being proposed this session. And I've been working closely with our commissioners and county attorney's office to evaluate it. And there's nothing being proposed that would directly impact our conservation easements in Boulder County, with the exception that one of the proposals would potentially make it more of an incentive for landowners to donate conservation easements, because there could be an improved tax benefit at the state level. That's the only one that comes to mind as something that could impact our easements for this particular session right now. But we have to constantly watch, because sometimes things happen that could have other results. So.
Great. And then my second question, and again, just from a really high level, if you can comment on allowable changes that can be made on a property where you own a conservation easement and then buy it in fee.
Well, I actually can't comment on that, because I only work as the holder of those easements. So once, I think in that instance that you're speaking of, where the county comes in and buys that property in fee, the minute that happens and the easement merges with the fee title, it comes out of my management, and I'm not involved in anything with that, because the conservation easement has gone away. So.
Okay,
And
Yeah.
if I could offer an additional appendix to that statement, Melissa's absolutely right. But to answer that, then it's owned by the county for open space and it can be used for open space purposes only.
Okay. Thank you.
Stephen?
Yeah, just briefly, what kind of, or what's involved in training or teaching somebody to do monitoring on a property?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think the most important thing somebody needs that I can't teach is how to get along with people. It is the most important part of this job. And if you don't like people and working with them and working through things, you know, it's going to be a difficult road. But otherwise, we teach them about our navigating equipment and being able to collect simple data on smart devices. So if it's our volunteers, they use their smartphones and they have to use one simple application, and others can get a little more savvy and involve others in there, but they help to collect the actual data points and photographs and send us that information so we can put it in our mapping system. And then the other thing, we do basic review on, you know, the field observations of what they're looking for. So they have to know how to do a basic interpretation on that easement and know when they're in the field, if they're seeing something that is allowed under that easement or not. So a little bit of a legal overview there, but honestly, you know, they come back a lot with their findings to me and my staff, and we can help direct them in some of the more fine points that they discover. And then a natural resource component. We do a really kind of general jack of all trades overview of some natural resource things to be looking for, whether it's plant identification, wildlife, noxious weeds, water rights, things like that. You know, I think the thing with our work is to get along with people, be able to be a resource to them for the county, and to be able to just kind of spot issues and not have those answers on the spot, but come back into the office, work with me, and I can, and my staff, and we can do some more detailed follow-up. So for the seasonals, we'll be doing a lot of the more involved follow-up. So
Thank you. Just a follow-up. You mentioned that sometimes there is a plan in place for a particular easement. How are those developed?
the management plans.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the management plans are developed in one of two ways. One is if the landowner is seeking that guidance, and we can join into a partnership to just be able to put some of our expertise into a written document, and it's not recorded, it's just signed between our staff and the landowner. The other way is if there has been an issue, either a misstep from the landowner, perhaps they've maybe something happened that created a degradation of a resource, and we will work with them to come in and come up with some very specific steps about protecting. If the easements don't get too detailed, which they don't always in some things, we can get more detailed in these management plans and develop, like, here's your wetland, here's your criteria of how to protect this wetland, and we might pull in our expert staff in ecology and wildlife to create some of these finer points, because, you know, again, I'm not a super expert in all these things either, so we lean on a lot of our staff members to come in and help us define some of those criteria.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Any other POSAC members?
Trace Baker here. Thank you, Melissa. I want to follow up with Paula's question about tracking the legislative process. And should there be pending legislation that would conflict with county conservation easement issues, what do you do? Is that a discussion with legislatures? Is that mounting a lobbying effort? How does that work?
Yeah, excellent question. Hopefully we're made aware of these things before they become signed bills, and we participate in conversation. Primarily Mark Resin at the Commissioner's office helps us to go and speak to the legislators and convey points, and he's kind of our voice. And then also with Keep It Colorado, which I mentioned is a sort of statewide organization that helps all holders of easements bring their concerns to the table. They also can take, they do take our concerns into consideration when they help to influence legislation. And then if something does get signed into ink, we have no choice. We have to comply. There can always be amendments to these bills, and we have seen that happen as well, where sometimes there's an inadvertent impact, and we have a pretty good relationship with our legislators and conservation easements. They've been really well received with both parties, and so far we haven't had too much difficulty, but that's generally how things would go. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you, Melissa.
Yeah.
Okay. Hey, let's do this game. Is there, Nick and V, is there questions from the public online?
Yes, Jeff Unger has their hand raised to speak. So, Jeff, if you want to state your name and address, and we'll allow you to comment.
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
All right. Jeff Unger, Erie, Colorado, 1357 Washburn Street. I have a comment about conservation easements and real estate purchase. However, it is associated with the Rainbow open space. Given your earlier comment, is that not appropriate for me to comment on tonight?
That would be, I appreciate your honesty, Jeff. Yes, it would be inappropriate. But hey, Jeff, as I said, and I'm going to emphasize this, because it's a legal issue right now, I do think that it will get to POSAC probably the next month or two. Hopefully, did you get the address if you want to send a comment directly to the commissioners?
I did.
If you can do that, and then just keep your eyes peeled for when it'll be on the POSAC agenda. My guess, I don't want to speculate, my guess it'll be this spring. I could be wrong, but my guess in the next few months it'll be on the agenda.
Okay.
All righty.
If I understood what you're saying, one of the reasons we're not talking about this tonight is because given the lawsuits that are in play, the county representatives are not allowed to comment on the situation.
Yeah, a little bit of that, and then, like I say, we'll be a little bit ahead of the game a little bit, and I think, like I said, we'll put it formally on the agenda and allow, have the forum and allow people to comment. And we'll, like I say, I would guess that'd be on the agenda down the road, and then from there, remember, we're an advisory board, so from us, whatever recommendation comes out of that, we make to the commissioners, and eventually, of course, it's the commissioner's decision.
Sure.
Okay.
I do have a side comment then.
Sure.
With regard to that topic, in that, with all due respect to the committee, I'm disappointed that I'm not able to make a comment on this tonight, given that conservation easements and real estate policy are both on the agenda. Although I do understand if there are legal reasons why we cannot discuss this, that makes sense to me. Often, and especially recently, we citizens are accused of not being involved enough in our local government. This is the third meeting I've attended where I sought to engage in a real-time communication about this issue, the Rainbow open space, with county representatives, and so far it's not happened. Obviously, this is a hot topic and many citizens are upset. We're here and ready to engage in local government. It's unfortunate that we hadn't been able to. So thank you for your consideration tonight.
Hey, Jeff, I appreciate you coming out tonight and for your comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Is there any others? V.
Jim, this is Eric. For some reason, I can't get my video to come on, but if I might just address it, I just want to be clear with the public. We're not trying to stifle conversation, but since this hasn't been noticed as a meeting to talk about Rainbow Nursery and the issues surrounding Rainbow Nursery, it's simply not fair to the public to engage POSAC outside of the public process. So when the public process does begin, there will be ample opportunity and everyone from the public will be able to comment, hear each other's comments, et cetera. So in the spirit of having a full and transparent discourse, it's simply unfair to other members of the public who might have a feeling about this to have a discussion about that public issue before it is actually noticed as a public agenda item for conversation. So it's really in fairness to the process to make sure everybody from the public can be involved, not missing comments that are popping up in randomly different meetings where you wouldn't suspect it would be on the agenda.
Yeah. All right. Thank you, Eric. Any other online comments?
Ed Dawson has their hand raised. Ed, go ahead. Please state your name and address.
Good evening. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, name's Ed Dawson. Live at 11285 Lookout Road in Longmont. Excuse me. I just wanted to follow up on a comment that Janice made where she said that land that was covered by a conservation easement will ultimately always be used by the county as open space So as a landowner, if I were to donate or sell land with the conservation easement, could I be guaranteed in perpetuity that that would be used for greenbelt or open space?
Thank you for your question, Ed. What I said was that when a conservation easement is lifted or comes off of a property through merger by the county's acquisition of the property for open space, it remains as open space. I didn't say that it will always be open space. And to answer your question, in the county's open space sales and use tax resolution, which is the law of what the county can use the sales tax money for, there is a specific process that if a piece of property were to be proposed to come out of an open space use, there is a specific public process that would have to be undergone that includes public notice, public hearings. Essentially what we are anticipating would happen for the Rainbow Nursery property if the commissioners were to decide to move that project forward. So while a property has been purchased for open space, it will be used for open space until such time as that may occur. However, it is very rare that that does occur. So while it's not, I cannot say that it will always be used for open space and it will never be used for something else. I can tell you that there is a specific process. It's a detailed process. It's an involved process. And I can also assure you that the county does not consider changing open space to other uses lightly and would only do so after considering as many options as they possibly can before making a decision to move forward on something like that.
Okay, great. Thank you. So it's a case by case and there is an existing process.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay. Thank you, Ed. Thank you for coming out tonight. Is there any other more online questions before we move to PM and design? Okay. Janice, who's next?
Okay, so we've got Sean coming up next. I'm going to stop my video, mute myself, and then share. Well, that didn't launch it, so let me try again.
Good evening, POSAC members. My name is Sean Reynolds, and I'm the Project Manager Lead and Supervisor for the Project Management and Design Work Group under the Rec and Facilities Divisions of Parks and Open Space. Tonight, I'd like to go over the Project Management and Design Desired Future Conditions. The Project Management and Design Work Group is made up of multiple professional employees. As I mentioned before, I'm the Project Manager Lead and Team Supervisor. Our group represents a unique collection of specialists from civil engineers and landscape architects to project managers and graphic designers, all with years of experience in their respective positions. The major focus of our work group has historically been to develop, design, and construct large and technically challenging projects for the Rec and Facilities Division. But over the last 6 to 7 years, we have been the group to tackle large and challenging projects for the department as a whole. The projects that we work on fall into many categories. We do POSAC projects, stewardship projects, and many different types of state and federally funded grant projects. Our large projects are usually designed by a professional engineering consultant and constructed by private contractors. The PM&D staff work with our consultants to develop designs, procure permits, write and advertise RFPs and bids, and then manage the construction implementation through the closeout process. We also design and construct smaller in-house projects like trailheads, trail systems, bridges, restrooms, park shelters, amenities, drainage infrastructure, and signage. Our graphic design team is responsible for signage design, manufacturing, installation, inventory, and maintenance of over 2,000 individual signs throughout our properties. So now I'd like to transition into the PM&D group's desired future conditions, goals, and strategies. Because we work on projects almost exclusively throughout the year, our goals and strategies are more geared to how we can improve our processes and procedures. Our desired future conditions are as stated. High quality, timely, and fiscally responsible design and construction projects are delivered that meet the intended purpose and goals of the project while preserving the natural, cultural, and aesthetic values of the landscape, minimizing long-term maintenance commitments, and promoting the needs and well-being of all community members. Our goals. Goal number 1, design and manage projects through effective internal and external collaboration. Goal number 2, complete projects on time and within budget. Goal number 3, ensure construction and maintenance standards are documented, implemented, and advancing as best practices. Goal number 4, integrate ongoing maintenance needs, sustainable materials, and climate considerations into the built environment. And goal number 5, to create design projects that promote visitor interaction, connectivity, and stewardship. So let's look at goal number 1. Goal number 1 is to design and manage projects through effective internal and external collaboration. Our first objective is to ensure participation in all management planning efforts that will or may directly affect PM&D work plans by actively reaching out to the planning department on a monthly basis to determine and document involvement throughout the year. Objective number 2 is to document all management plan communications involving PM&D staff using meeting notes, meeting minutes, or web-based communications such as Teams throughout the year. And objective 3 is to provide proper outreach to involve stakeholders for project input by scheduling and implementing design charrettes that include public involvement when necessary in the design phase for all planned work in 2021. Goal 2 is to complete all projects on time and within budget. We will do this by developing accurate critical path schedules prior to the start of any work projects for 2021. The next thing is to develop an accurate budget estimate prior to the start of projects for 2021. We need to eliminate scope creep by planning all elements of a design from the outset, mitigating last-minute additions. The next objective is to track both critical path schedules and budgets weekly throughout the duration of the project using Microsoft Project and Oracle Excel spreadsheets. And next, we want to implement a new design and construction model that mirrors the contracted process for internal projects in 2021. We have found that contracted or external projects tend to run much better than our in-house projects because there are some internal constraints that can negatively affect how efficiently we complete in-house design and construction. In my opinion, those constraints are overall project authority. Our current POS structure does not allow for an assigned project manager to maintain authority over the implementation crew because many times there are multiple employees from multiple work groups that report to different supervisors, and those supervisors may have other assignments or goals to accomplish that will conflict with the project schedule. Next is funding cycles. Oftentimes the projects we want to complete can exceed the POSAC allocation for that year. This results in piecemeal projects that get completed over multiple budget cycles instead of securing all the funding for implementation prior to starting the project. Next is the reassignment of employees. Oftentimes, key employees may be pulled off a project to address other department concerns for long periods of time. This can cause specific scopes of work to slow down, negatively impacting the critical path schedule. And finally, in-house construction equipment. With so many work groups trying to schedule and use our equipment, it can be difficult to reserve or keep the machines we need for a project for long periods of time. Last year, I put together an internal construction model document that may help to address some of these concerns. This document outlines the roles and responsibilities of the design team, the project manager, the site superintendent, and all assigned staff. I hope to get this new process implemented in 2021. Goal number 3, ensure construction and maintenance standards are documented, implemented, and advancing as best practices. With the completion of our construction and maintenance handbook last year, we now have a living document that captures our standard designs, specifications, and maintenance responsibilities for the Recreation and Facilities Division. Our objective here is to make sure that that document is utilized and evolves as best practices change or are improved. Goal 4 is to integrate ongoing maintenance needs, sustainable materials, and climate considerations into the built environment. The intent of these objectives is to minimize our carbon footprint by locally sourcing construction materials that are sustainable. Oftentimes, other local municipalities may be doing projects that might generate material that could be used on our projects or vice versa. By communicating and working with our municipal partners, there's opportunity to reduce waste and keep materials from going to the landfill. We also look to reduce our maintenance burden by actively engaging the work group that perform the maintenance into the initial design process. If we can incorporate sound design principles and practices in our projects, then we can reduce the time and scope associated with maintenance activities each year. Goal 5, to create design projects that promote visitor interaction, connectivity, and stewardship. We want to complete and implement ADA access designs at Walker Ranch. We want to effectively manage the trail construction at Tolan Ranch. And we want to finalize and implement the English-Spanish sign plan in 2021. At Walker Ranch, we want to improve ADA access. Last year, we completed the initial survey of the homestead area. This season, our in-house LAs will design and develop improvements to the site with an emphasis on ADA access to buildings, to and from the parking lot, roads and trails, and accessibility to interpretive structures. They will also engage the grounds and trails crews to look at how maintenance activities can be minimized through this design effort. Next, we have Tolan Trail. This project promotes connectivity. The project consists of 4.3 miles of new trail construction on a public trail easement through Tolan Ranch. The trail will provide a connection between two United States Forest Service trail systems, West Magnolia in Nederland and Jenny Creek in Eldora. The goal of the trail construction is to build a sustainable natural surface non-motorized multi-use trail while protecting the natural and cultural resources of the area. This grant-funded project will begin this season once weather allows for the contractor to mobilize. This project will likely take 2 seasons to complete because of the short construction window in the high alpine environment. 1 mile of this trail was already completed in 2020 by our volunteer efforts. Another large assignment will be to begin the implementation of our English-Spanish signage project. The intent here is to improve our inclusivity and provide helpful and regulatory information throughout our park systems in English and Spanish. Given the large scale of this project, work will likely continue through multiple seasons as we plan the best path forward. While all of our projects address goals number 1 and number 2, the following projects are additional examples that will specifically improve stewardship, connectivity, and promote visitor interaction objectives in 2021. The Niwot Ditch Diversion Reconstruction and Fish Passage Installation Project is currently underway now. This project will help promote land stewardship by providing flood protection, ditch infrastructure protection, and restoration of fish passage to a section of stream through the installation of a multi-objective upper bypass structure and associated in-stream and riparian floodplain elements. This project has CDBG-DR grant funding and comes with an extremely aggressive schedule. The 104th Street Trail project will promote trail connectivity. This project is a partnership with the City of Louisville and the City of Lafayette. The goal is to construct an 8-foot wide, primarily soft surface crusher fines multi-use trail that links Coal Creek Trail to the Rock Creek Trail. This design effort will be completed in 2021. And finally, we have the Calwood Fire restoration at Hile Valley Ranch. This project will return trail connectivity and visitor interaction while promoting stewardship of the property by looking to mitigate major erosive events in the drainage basin. Because of the massive damage sustained at the park, there are multiple scopes of restoration work that need to be facilitated. An emergency watershed protection grant has been procured to address the following: aerial mulching of the burn scar that should help mitigate erosive flows. A detention basin will be designed and constructed to catch runoff before it gets into Gear Creek. Debris catching structures will be designed and placed higher up in the drainage basins to capture woody material, trees, and boulders that might come down in a rain event, and in-creek elements will be designed and constructed to help dissipate sediment in Gear Creek. The infrastructure repairs consist of replacement of 3 bridges, replacement of melted plastic drainage culverts with corrugated metal culverts. The upper trailhead and parking lot will be evaluated and repaired as needed. Internal access roads will be evaluated repair and mitigation elements designed and then installed, and signage will be replaced or repaired as needed. The forestry work has already started on site, and all hazardous trees will be removed and turned into mulch for the aerial mulching efforts. The value of this work can be used to match the EWP grant. There will also be a significant communication and coordination effort required to work with all internal and external stakeholders, including the general public. At this stage, we are defining all scopes of work and developing a master critical path schedule for overall project implementation. Well, this concludes the project management and design group's desired future conditions, goals, and objectives presentations. Thank you for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you all may have.
Thank you, Sean, for coming out tonight. Hey, I'll throw it out to the POSAC members. Any questions?
Hey, Sean, this is Tony Lewis. I have a couple questions for you.
No problem.
One is, and great presentation, thanks. Super helpful. I'm curious on the English-Spanish signage. One of the things I've noticed is that we're good at putting regulations in Spanish, but nothing welcoming. The general display board is like, hey, welcome here in English. It's a great place to be. And then all the regs are in Spanish.
Yeah, that is something we've been looking at. It's a great question. Some of the other things that we'd like to implement this year with the Spanish-English sign rollout is, of course, some of the examples you saw there, like fishing signs at some of our fishing reservoirs. We also want to look at implementing the Spanish into some of our kiosks at our park trailheads this year. Regulatory signage, as you mentioned, and then sign requests that come in that are applicable. One thing we're running up against in this effort is just the scale of the project. 2,000 signs, we want to figure out the best way to systematically work through all the different sign types and all the different information in a way that makes sense, but also utilizing the resources that we currently have and that we will need in an efficient manner. So we're still kind of in the development phase of how we're going to roll this out, but for 2021, those are the design, that's the sign design team's goals. And if we can get a lot of that knocked out, we'll definitely keep going.
Okay. Yeah, I'd love to see your kind of priority process when you guys develop that.
Sure.
That'd be great.
Okay.
Second question is, you mentioned that some projects require, or I don't know if they require is the right word, but utilize public input, and that some projects don't. I'm just curious if you could give an example or two of those. I'm just trying to wrap my head around which ones do and which ones don't.
Yeah, it can be case by case, but a lot of times any of the infrastructure that we're going to build at a trailhead or a new trail area, those require a lot of outreach, design charrettes, asking the public for comments. What do you want to see here? What would you get the most enjoyment out of? And we get comments from mountain bikers and horse people and regular hikers and everything you can think of. So that would be more of an example of a public outreach process. An example of kind of a less of a public outreach process is, I think you guys are all familiar with the large reservoir project that the department finished up actually last year, the $12 million infrastructure repair of 4 reservoirs up there by the Brawley property.
Yeah.
That didn't have a lot of, it did go through a land use process, but it didn't have like design charrettes or what people want to see out there, because really the intent was to repair these reservoirs and protect infrastructure downstream. So that's kind of an example of one versus the other. Projects that are going to have the public actively on them a lot, we will try to do more outreach. But projects that are, for other reasons, water resources, things like that, reservoirs, then those typically are less publicly active.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And Tony, I would encourage you to think about engaging on that issue of signage at the retreat when we'll give you a good look at the draft cultural responsiveness and inclusion strategic plan, where signage and engagement with the Latinx community is one of the issues. So I think we can continue this conversation even in more detail in a week and a half.
That'd be great, Eric. I look forward to that, because I think one of the things I noticed when I was on the GOCO board similar issues like, well, we've had lots of communities that we gave grants to, and somebody said, well, we didn't give, grants to some small communities because they never applied. And the question was, did they ever know, right? Like maybe they didn't apply because they actually didn't know. And so I think about that in terms of public input as well. Like if we only get public input from people who are current users, then we'll never reach the Latinx users. We'll never reach people who don't actually use the resource. And we have to be, mindful of that. So,
Sure.
So that'd be great to engage in.
Okay. Thanks, Tony. Any other POSAC members have a question?
Yeah, hey, Jim, Ann Obenchain. I have a question for you, Sean, and thanks for a great presentation. I'm wondering if you could just give an update on the schedule and the extent of the aerial mulching at Heil.
Okay. I can give you kind of a 20,000 foot update on that. I think Stefan and David Hurt, who will be presenting later specifically on some of that stuff, will give you the details. But it's my understanding that a RFP or request for proposal or bid has been put out to solicit the aerial mulching companies for their bids for that work. Once those bids come back, there'll be a evaluation of wildlife and things up there that we would like to see from a contractor, and make their selection. Along with the aerial mulching bid that's going out is I've assigned an engineer to the Calwood project to help facilitate the rest of the work on the EWP, which is detention basins, catching structures, in-stream elements, things like that, but to also take the project farther and coordinate everything we need to do to get all the infrastructure repaired that is not funded by the EWP. So we're currently working on all that right now. And in fact, we're putting together a master schedule for the overall project and a master estimate for construction implementation. And Charlotte and I are looking to get that completed in the next week or so, so that we know, what the schedule is going to look like up there, because there's lots of coordination. We need to tell the public when things are going to be happening. We also need to keep people out of the area when aerial mulching is going on, for example. Nobody can be in there working or recreating, and we have to coordinate all those scopes of work. So that's where we're at right now. But again, as far as the details on the specific aerial mulching, I think David Hurt will be the one to give you all those details.
Okay, great. Thank you.
No problem.
Super. Thanks, Ann. Any others? And then how about Nick and V? How about online questions, comments? Thank you. Anybody else? Sean, I think we'll let you go with that. Thank you for coming out tonight.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Okay. Next up, we have Susan, Stefan, and David, and species conservation and recovery plans.
All right, hello, I'm going to share my screen. All right, are we good? It should be working. Let's see. Oh, I always forget the share button. Okay, sorry. Now we're good?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Good evening, POSAC. I'm Susan Spalding, Senior Biologist at Parks and Open Space. And today my colleagues, Stefan Reinold, David Hurt, and I will be presenting our SCRPs, which stands for Species Conservation and Recovery Plans. So let me start with our Boulder County land acknowledgement. So in the spirit of healing and education, Boulder County Parks and Open Space acknowledges all the contemporary American Indian tribes and ancestral lineage in the state of Colorado, which includes the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute people, whose traditional homelands included Boulder County at the period when the non-natives invaded and seized their land for their own benefit. Boulder County Parks and Open Space aims to help mitigate past impacts on our native ecosystems through collaboration with contemporary American Indians, and through restoration and education. Okay, so tonight I'm going to be covering the origins of how we were given guidance to create these plans, how we prioritize which species of special concern receive this level of planning effort, the intended use of the plans, both internally and externally, and then we will each present a subset of our plans and discuss how we implement conservation actions on behalf of these species. Okay, so to get at the origins of these plans, we need a quick overview of the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan. So the comp plan was first drafted in 1978 as an overarching plan for Boulder County. This document, as you know, is very progressive and all-encompassing in its scope, and its main philosophies are growth channel to cities, agricultural lands protection, and preservation of environmental resources. It's comprised of several different elements, including transportation, cultural resources, sustainability, housing, and environmental resources. And since 1978, individual elements have been periodically updated, which includes a public process and requires approval by the Boulder County Planning Commission. So the element that serves as the overall guide for the Resource Management Division is the Environmental Resources Element, or ERE. The comp plan itself states that the responsibility of updating the ERE shall be that of POS, even though the comp plan is countywide. So therefore, our division was tasked with updating this element starting in 2011. This was a large undertaking that involved several staff across the department, including planning and GIS staff, and was partially interrupted by the flood, but the update was approved in 2013 and the associated maps were adopted in 2014. So as I mentioned before, when we updated the ERE, we fully engaged with the public and also outside experts. And out of that process, important language was added to the ERE as follows. Acknowledging our responsibility to ensure that naturally occurring ecosystems and their native species populations continue to exist and flourish in Boulder County will develop conservation and recovery plans for priority species of special concern. So that's the origin of the conservation plans, but what is a species of special concern? So one of the main goals in the comp plan is Boulder County sustains and protects native species and biodiversity of the region by designating high biodiversity areas, critical wildlife habitats, rare plant areas, wetlands, riparian areas, and species of special concern. And in the ERE, these species are defined as the flora and fauna in the county whose populations may be threatened or endangered, locally rare, experiencing long-term population declines, isolated or restricted, or native species which have ceased to exist in Boulder County. Okay, so here's our specific criteria for these species. Basically, if the species has federal or state rankings, or have imminent known threats, or if a species is extirpated but could possibly be reestablished, they are considered high priority for inclusion on the list. Okay, so back to our commitment to develop conservation plans for our priority species. Since the update of the ERE, the Resource Management Division has completed 23 plans as listed here. These plans include wildlife, insects, plants, and tree species, and has been a multidisciplinary effort across work groups. So on to a quick overview of the plans themselves and their structure, as well as their intended use. These plans include information on the species, including life history traits and habitat requirements. They list potential threats to the species and conservation actions. These conservation actions are referred to in the ERE as follows. Boulder County shall promote the viability and integrity of all naturally occurring ecosystems and their native species populations by applying a variety of environmental conservation practices. Okay, so their intended use is both internal and external, as the plans are supposed to be used countywide and not just open space. So this countywide use is summarized in the ERE as follows. Boulder County shall work in partnership with private landowners to protect, conserve, and restore designated environmental resources. And Boulder County shall encourage all private landowners to seek assistance to protect Boulder County's environmental resources. So it's really appropriate that Melissa gave her presentation on conservation easements earlier because it ties right into this. How will the county work with engaging with private landowners? So as of this year, we got approval to move forward with our ERE coordinator position. And Tim Schaefer, who is one of our wildlife biologists, will fill this role. And the funding is coming from a grant from the Parks and Open Space Foundation. So Tim's going to work closely with our conservation easement program as a start towards reaching private landowners. And we hope to eventually grow the program as we gauge interest and realities. We envision this position to eventually be shared between Parks and Open Space and community planning and permitting. Okay, and so related to internal use of Parks and Open Space, the ERE states, Boulder County shall use its open space program as one means of achieving its goals for protecting environmental resources. All right, so next, Stefan, David, and I are going to present a subset of our 23 plans as listed here. So first up is the northern leopard frog. But before I go into the details, remember that these plans list threats and conservation actions. So first I'll outline threats and then how our program is attempting to mitigate those threats for this species. This slide shows the first page of our plan, or actual plan for the leopard frogs. So this is what they physically look like. So here's that executive summary from the first page in large. And all of our plans have these quick summaries on the first page, and they're intended to be a quick overview for reference and ease of use. And of course, the document itself goes into full details. So as you just saw, listed under the threats section is habitat degradation. This leads to invasive species like weeds and bullfrogs, poor water quality due to many factors, including fertilizers, pesticides, and general runoff, mismanaged cattle grazing, climate change, and high intensity fires like parts of the Calwood fire, which you'll hear about later. So that's a long list to overcome. So how are we taking action on behalf of these frogs? So one of the main conservation actions we're taking is riparian corridor management. Here's an example of an exclosure fence for cattle management on our Gage property. We've had good success, and here you see the vegetation response. The riparian corridor condition shown on the right is better for leopard frog habitat values and water quality. So another management action we've taken as a department is habitat restoration. This is Rock Creek on Rock Creek Farm. The plant ecology group worked with urban drainage to restore this area and incorporated some habitat features for leopard frogs. So basically they built in shallow backwater channels at the, areas at the meandering curves in the creek. Leopard frogs need shallow, slow water to lay their eggs. And as you can see, the frogs did show up. David Hurt, who you're going to hear from in a bit, actually took this picture of the frog post-restoration. So we've also accomplished habitat modification projects. Thanks to our volunteer project leaders and youth corps, we've been able to manage cattail growth in leopard frog breeding ponds. So cattails shade out the egg masses of these frogs. So we don't want a pond full of tall, thick cattails. We've also been working on invasive species eradication. Non-native bullfrogs are a huge problem for many native amphibians, as they eat them directly or pass along a non-native fungus or outcompete for resources in general, and or all of the above. And we're also about to implement some newer survey techniques, including environmental DNA and acoustic monitoring, to help us understand more about where our frogs are on the landscape. Okay, so next I'm going to cover one of our bat species of concern, the long-legged myotis. Now I'll mention here that all bat species found in Boulder County, of which there are 12, are on our species of concern list. Bats as a group face many threats, including white nose syndrome, habitat destruction, wind energy, climate change, large-scale forestry, and general human disturbance. And I would say, as of now, misperception of bats being disease vectors. So this species, the long-legged myotis, lives a minimum of 25 years. Their habitat requirements include forested areas and trees and rock crevices for roosting. These guys are quite rare, and only one maternity colony that we know of exists in Boulder County, and it's located at our very own Cardinal Mill near Netherland. So conservation action we're taking on behalf of the long-legged myotis and other bats as a department include adjusting visitation to our open historic structures to avoid the pup rearing times of the year. And along the same lines, we try to do maintenance or improvement to structures outside the bat breeding season. And of course, we work closely with forestry on the restoration projects to incorporate habitat structure conducive to what the bats need. And we also work together to protect historic structures with bats. And this year, we're working on securing the Blue Jay mine near Jamestown with many people involved across the department. We also conduct surveys, including acoustic monitoring to determine which species of bats are present in an area and to better understand habitat needs. So with that, I should have mentioned that at the beginning, we can hold questions until we've all spoken, if that's all right. So next up is Stefan. And I need to stop sharing.
Still there, Susan.
I'm here. I'm trying to stop sharing. Sorry about that. Hold on 1 second. Okay.
Okay, here we go.
So actually, how do I stop sharing? Is it gone?
Yep.
Okay, good. Okay, good. Thank you.
Oh, Nick.
All right, can you see my screen? Can people see my screen? Great. Hi, so Stefan Reinhold, I'm the senior forester with Parks. So I'm going to talk about our forestry species of special concern. A little bit easier for us. We have 13 native trees to the state, so I don't have as many to go through, but we certainly have some species that we are concerned about. So the first one I'm going to talk about is limber pine. So limber pine is, and both of the species I'm going to talk about today are 5-needle pines. So limber pine is a really long-lived species, in many cases over 1,000 years. And so it's a really important species from that perspective, because if we lose them and start back from the beginning, to get that kind of historic structure is really difficult. But limber pine is found on dry sites, inhospitable sites. In some cases, you can see the photo here, it's kind of on a windswept side slope. In some cases, it acts as a pioneer species where there's maybe a rocky scree field. Limber pine is one of the first things to get started. Limber pine can be a multi-stemmed type tree. It also has this weird thing of being often looks very sickly, even though it's a perfectly healthy tree. So sometimes that makes looking at a tree and deciding whether it's got any kind of insect and disease issue difficult. It also has, here's another good close-up there. It has a very wide range. So it can grow from anywhere from 5,200 feet all the way up to 11,000 feet. And so what we're really concerned about is when it makes up more than 20% of the canopy. You can easily find limber pine here and there, but when it makes up more of the canopy, it actually acts as its own style of forest. And a lot of times, not in Boulder County, but a lot of times limber pine and bristlecone pine grow together in those situations. But it's really a minor component in 8,000 feet and below. Let's see here. And again, and that map, the red locations on the dark red locations on the map are locations that we know where it does exist in 20% in the canopy or more. What are the threats? Well, for both of these species, the biggest threat is white pine blister rust, which is a non-native rust that is causing a lot of damage to our pines. Another is, and you can see this is actually a picture of rust on one of the trees on one of our properties. Another kind of picture of that rust. And what's interesting about this rust is it's only visible for about 2 to 3 weeks that you can actually see it on the tree. So it really makes identification difficult. And then dwarf mistletoe, a parasitic plant. Dwarf mistletoe is really an interesting, especially with limber pine. There's a lot of different varieties of dwarf mistletoe that infect specific species. But, and for the most part, it doesn't kill the tree. It just weakens it, and other pathogens come in. Unfortunately, with limber pine, the mistletoe actually will kill the tree. And so that's another big issue that we see. Mountain pine beetle, I'm sure you've heard of that, obviously can affect limber pine as another threat. Wildfire, there's a lot of interactions that are not fully understood with wildfire. Obviously, a devastating fire can kill a lot of limber pine, but it is also known that openings are good locations for limber pine to get established. So there's a kind of complex relationship that's not 100% understood. And of course, climate change. The possibility of limber pine moving up in elevation is certainly something that could occur, and maybe at lower elevations, it might start to have some issues. What are our management considerations? We want to start mapping it better and understanding its locations better. And so that's something that we've been working on recently for parks, monitoring it. We actually you need to know what's going on. Where is white pine blister rust? Where is mistletoe? And then starting to understand about rust resistance. There's actually some naturally occurring resistance to the white pine blister rust. What are the actions we've taken? Like I said, we've mapped over the past few years. We have established 13 monitoring plots where we're trying to look at the progression of both the blister rust and mistletoe. Back in 2012, there was only one known location of white pine blister rust. And then we found a second one on Parks land, and now we're finding it pretty much on all of our properties that have limber pine. So the other thing we're trying to do now is work with the U.S. Forest Service, Rocky Mountain Research Station, and really try to understand the rust resistance and how to kind of combat it, and maybe start outreach with planting. And then we have bristlecone pine. And so you can see why bristlecone pine is called bristlecone pine. One of the difficulties with these two species is they're actually really hard to distinguish from each other, except for the cone, because they're both 5-needle pines. And sometimes most of the time, like I said, they grow near each other. The one thing that really makes it easier is if you actually look at the needles, and if you see these white, and I think you can see my cursor, but if you see the white little resin droplets on it, then it's going to be bristlecone pine, because that doesn't happen in limber. So it's an interesting way to see the difference. The neat thing about bristlecone for us is that we have the furthest known north location of bristlecone pine in the state. And it is on one of our properties. It's called the Forest property. And you know, a lot of those trees are actually really small, though. They're actually 6 inches in diameter. And it kind of borders onto Forest Service land a little bit as well. And there's potential, of course, for there to be other pockets of this in this location. So we will kind of look on our properties to see if we can find any more locations. Now, having said that, there are some reported single trees or a couple trees here and there a little further north, but a lot of them are actually tied to possible planting by humans, not by natural methods. So this is the location that's considered the furthest known to the north. It is going to be more in the higher elevations. The elevation that we found this at is 10,700 feet. It can go up to 12,000 feet, but obviously not in Colorado, because tree line is typically accepted at 11.5, 11.7. It shows up in areas similar, like I said, to limber in terms of being able to grow in really harsh conditions. This first photo here with my cursor, that ridge over here, that is the forest property, and that's where it's located. Same issues again, white pine blister rust. It doesn't have the same issue with mistletoe, although it can be infected by the same mistletoe that infects limber pine. So if we find mistletoe in that stand, we'll probably take care of it.
Same thing with climate change. It could be slowly moving based on the change in climate. Wildfire, again, not quite understood, but we do know that it likes to get established in open areas. Our management considerations are mapping, monitoring, cone collection. Same 3 actions. We did do a site visit in 2020 to find out where it's located. We are going to try to map individual trees and kind of make a plot map in 2021. And we will, again, reach out to the U.S. Forest Service and Rocky Mountain Research Station about cone collection and trying to understand if it's located in any other locations. So that's really it we have from the forestry side of things. So I will stop sharing.
Okay, I will, I'm gonna make my EVA at this time, so I'll turn it over to Paula, but I think we still have David to go, correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, let me share my screen. Good evening, POSAC. Oh, except my bars. Can we see that?
Yes.
Why does it do that? Working? All right, Good evening. David Hurt, Senior Plant Ecologist with Parks and Open Space. I'll briefly touch on our conservation recovery plans for some plants and plant communities. So the comprehensive plan ERE list from 2013 includes 164 plant species of special concern and 106 significant natural plant communities. So it's quite an extensive list. But to put that into perspective, there's about 1,500 plant species in Boulder County, which is a huge number for a county the size, as small as Boulder County is. And obviously that a lot of that's due to the elevational gradient we have here in the county. Susan talked about, the criteria for listing. We have many of the similar criteria. We had to have one of these required criteria to be on the list or 2 of these conditional criteria. And I actually don't list all the conditional ones there. But a lot of the similar things with wildlife. One that might be a little different is species threatened with collection. There's maybe cacti or orchids that would make it on the list just because of those threats. So since we had such a large list, we had to kind of narrow it down to these 10 plans we started with here. We took the cream of the crop being any federal T&E species, of which there were 2 at the time. We looked at any species that were imperiled or critically imperiled, both in the state and globally. And that really shrunk it down to, maybe a dozen species in a dozen communities when you combine both those global and state rankings. And then we wanted to look at where these species occurred. Are they on parks and open space properties? Are they already protected by other agencies? And one example is there's a monkey flower that occurs. It's very critically imperiled, both state and globally, a G1S1 ranking. But the only population is in Indian Peaks Wilderness Area. And it likes these kind of cliffside seeps at 11, 12,000 feet. So although it is critically imperiled, the population in Boulder County is pretty well protected. And we felt, Boulder County Parks and Open Space wouldn't have a lot of input on management of that species, nor would there be a lot of private landowners that may, have this species occurring on their land that we could help with some conservation actions. So we dropped that and looked at some other species that we could make more tangible progress in protection and conservation on. So we ended up with 5 species and 5 communities: the Utes Lady Tress Orchid, Colorado butterfly plant, which are the 2 federal threatened species, Bell's twin pod, wood lily, and the moonwort complex, which is actually multiple species of this very diminutive fern-like plant seen in the lower right there. and 5 plant communities, needle and threadgrass, antelope bitterbrush complex, hackberry blue bunch wheatgrass, mountain mahogany big blue stem complex, Indian ricegrass shale barrens. And I say complex because there can be more than one association of these communities with similar species in it. And briefly, I'll just mention the 2 federal T&E species we have. These are the species we consider in all projects with federal funding, whether that's flood recovery or upcoming fire recovery projects or transportation projects with federal money. We had 2. One was delisted. The butterfly plant was delisted in October of 2019. So now there's just 1. But what I really want to mention, I think most people are unaware of, is that animals and plants are not equally protected by the Endangered Species Act. People think it's all the same, but actually animals are protected anywhere, on federal land, on private land, state land, county land. Plants are only protected on federal lands or in the instance of a project that has the nexus of federal funding with them. But there is no prohibition on taking plants on private property, even if they're a federally listed threatened or endangered species. So that's kind of unique and unfortunate. So a quick example of a few of our plans. The first here is Bell's Twin Pod. You're maybe familiar with this one if you ever drive Highway 36 between Lyons and Boulder in the spring. You'll see it on these road cuts along the highway. It grows on these shale slopes. So this is something that's, it's naturally rare. It's not rare because of that its habitat's been fragmented by actions, although it has, but it's just naturally rare because it only persists on these certain geologic substrates, these shales and limestones. This is a plant that's endemic to Colorado, grows nowhere else, and it actually only grows in 2 counties, Boulder and Larimer counties. So sometimes to me, it's interesting that this is not a federally listed species because that Utes ladytress orchid that is our one threatened species, I think has populations in about 6 states, whereas this plant only grows in 2 counties, and that's it for the world. You can see a map there of its distribution and our cover sheet for our conservation plan. Threats to this include, they can include limestone mining, maybe not as much of a threat now, housing development, not so much in Boulder County, but certainly up in Larimer County, where they're doing a lot of unincorporated county homes, and native plant encroachment. We've seen some of our these road right-of-ways where you already have these, things like smooth brome that were planted along highway projects in the past have encroached on this habitat and really just smother these plants out. A lot of rare plants are not great competitors. So, when they meet more aggressive neighbors, they can easily lose that battle. And there's our map in the county. That map, these are kind of a work in progress. This really does kind of occur up in that northeast part of the county. You wouldn't find it out east. That shading is kind of an elevational gradient. But it really is more restricted to those shale outcrops. And we could refine this map by kind of overlaying that geologic or soil surveys onto the map. So some of the conservation actions we've done, we continue to map populations when we acquire a new property along where we may think there may be suitable habitat. We'll go in there and survey for this plant and map it. The Lucan Dairy property that we've bought in recent past was a property that has this plant on it that we've mapped. We have some plots where we've been monitoring the long-term population trends, like seedling establishment and such, on properties, one property that's grazed, another property that's not grazed, to see if there's any differences there. We worked with the Colorado Natural Heritage Program to develop this recommended best management practices for road maintenance activities, since a lot of the times this plant does occur along road cuts. And so that's useful for CDOT or county transportation departments. And then that came into play recently when CDOT was indeed regrading one of the slopes along Highway 36, and there was a population of Bell's Twin Pod there. They reached out to us in the Denver Botanic Gardens. Denver Botanic Gardens was able to coordinate a salvage effort. So we dug up these plants, they potted them up. They're down at the Denver Botanic Gardens, and we hope to outplant those in a suitable place on parks and open space lands. Another one I want to throw in, just because it's kind of a showy, beautiful flower, and most people like those things, is the wood lily. And you can see this one is not, this is one of the ones that made the list, even though it was not ranked as highly. You can see it's secure globally. The state ranking, they kind of have a 3-4. We'll take the more conservative approach and say that's an S3, which is vulnerable. And I would say it is vulnerable in Boulder County. Threats to this include habitat loss, climate change, as it likes typically in wet and meadows and moist aspen groves, overgrazing and riparian areas, and collecting. And collecting is a big threat for a lot of native bulbs. It has been, there's been a native bulb trade since the 1800s. It's not so overt now, but people do tend to still see these, and an individual may just dig one up to move it to their garden at home. And typically that doesn't fare too well for the plant. And if they don't do that, they may just cut it as a cut flower because it is so showy, and then that precludes it from setting seed and reproducing in that manner. So last year we wanted to look at, we had some points, we had some mapped wood lily. We don't have this plant in many places, but we had some in some of our montane properties, but we hadn't been back to visit them in over 15 years. So we wanted to go back and check those. We also had the opportunity to, from a local grower who had some local seed and had grown some starts out, to outplant a flat of these at Caribou Ranch and Reynolds Ranch. And so we went back to our populations at Caribou, and happy to report that they were all there except for one, had plants blooming, looked healthy and well. The only, if you can see my cursor, the only place we did not find one was this far western population here, and that was the driest area of this whole kind of meadow. And last summer was dry, so maybe it just didn't come up last summer, didn't flower last summer. You can tell it'd be hard to find these plants if they weren't flowering, and how lush some of these understories are. But that does pretend that climate change could be a real threat to the species. A little bit of drier ground, and it may not be able to persist there. And then we went to look at some herbarium records. There's maybe 6 or 8 herbarium records we can find in the county. Most of those are just individual, 1 or 2 plants. But there was one record north of Sugarloaf Road off the Peak to Peak that said they had found 147 plants back in 1991. So that was significant. When we revisited that last summer, and we're only able to find 11 in that population. So that was a little worrisome. And then finally, I'll talk just briefly about a plant community. This is the Mountain Mahogany Complex. There's 2 different associations here, and you can see that the common denominator is the mountain mahogany and the big blue stem between the 2. They're both have a global and state ranking of imperiled. And if you're familiar with Boulder County, especially the northern part, around Lyons, Rabbit Mountain, Hall Ranch, northern part of Ohio, you would not necessarily think mountain mahogany is a rare community. And not everywhere mountain mahogany grows falls into this association. But mountain mahogany is pretty unique to northern Boulder County and through Larimer County, but not a lot of the rest of the state, and certainly not with this association. So these species themselves are not necessarily rare, but the assemblage together is. And I mentioned those 2 species. You have this mountain mahogany, which is this very xeric, drought-tolerant shrub that grows on these rocky substrates, and it's growing along with big blue stem, which is a real diagnostic plant of the tallgrass prairies. What you would find in eastern Kansas or Iowa, eastern Nebraska. And we have some relic populations right along the Front Range where we have a little bit more moisture than we do in the eastern Colorado plains. And so to find those 2 things growing together is pretty unique. It's kind of found right along those Front Range hogbacks and foothills, much like the Physaria. Threats include invasive species, grazing, could be overgrazing or undergrazing, altered fire regime, climate change, development. Park conservation actions for a lot of these communities as well as species, but is really avoidance of impact. So, we'll take, we have these mapped, these communities, and we can take that into consideration if we're siting a trail, we're looking at trail alternatives, any kind of other impacts from access roads or infrastructure, or even utility companies wanting to come through and do some repairs or new utilities. So we'll take that into consideration. This plant resprouts readily from fire. It's adapted to fire, so potentially increasing prescribed fire to mimic that natural frequency may benefit it. And monitoring grazing like we're doing at Rabbit Mountain. So not necessarily cattle, but native ungulates like elk that we have an overpopulation of at Rabbit, and our elk hunting management program out there. And you can see in the picture there in the upper photo, a part of Rabbit Mountain where the elk do not congregate versus the lower photo where they do tend to congregate in the middle of the park, and some substantially overgrazed shrubs there. That's all I have. Stop sharing.
Great. Thank you, David. I wanted to thank you all, Susan and Stefan and David, very good presentations. Bear with me while I try to facilitate this section here. So I'll open it up to any questions from or comments from POSAC members. Any questions? Okay. Nick, is there any questions from the public?
My name is Nancy Davis, and it's 10975 Lookout Road in Longmont. Wondering if you all can hear me.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. First of all, I don't know if Melissa is still there, but she talked about, people skills with talking to landowners or conservation easement owners. And I want to say that she absolutely has phenomenal people skills, and she's come out and looked at our conservation easement and answered great questions and gotten excited about what's there. And that has been really fun for us, and I appreciate that. I wanted to ask Susan, you said, you talked about how Boulder County residents can seek assistance to protect environmental resources. And recently, Steve Jones wrote a report called Wildlife Habitat Reconnaissance of Reverie Farms and Adjacent Properties in Eastern Boulder County. And one of the things in this report was open space and conservation easements help protect natural features throughout the conservation area, which supports a multitude of significant plants and plant communities along with a diverse wildlife population. Combined with the adjacent Gun Barrel Hill Environmental Conservation Area, the two conservation areas provide 15,000 acres of designated land that surround and buffer wildlife movement corridors along Boulder Creek and northward to St. Vrain Creek. It states the East County Conservation Area description in the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan states, and this is really where my question comes from, quote, restoration and conservation activities should be considered, which promotes prairie and riparian habitats, or which increases connectivity with the adjacent ECA and riparian corridors. All efforts to limit or reverse habitat fragmentation should be pursued. And I'm wondering, because Susan, you did speak to this a lot. With things like this report, a lot of questions I have, I honestly don't really know who to ask or what the authorities are, or if I have questions about something like this, where do I go with them? And before I forget, also on the screen, it said BCCP-08-003, a staff report to a planning committee. I'm wondering where I can find that. And those are my questions.
Great, thank you. Susan?
So I think you're asking where you can find resources to improve habitat on your properties. Am I understanding that correctly?
Sorry. again, you were talking about how people can find resources to seek
Right.
assistance if yeah.
Okay,
Yep.
thank you.
Yep.
Well, so I mentioned really briefly our ERE coordinator position that we have been given the go-ahead to implement. And that is an actual person who can work with private landowners. And the idea is to grow this program and this position to help private landowners connect with resources to help do restoration on their properties. And this person would come out to your property if you invite them and if you're interested to see what habitat conditions you have currently, and then recommend some potential improvements, depending on connectivity to other areas where we know certain species exist, as you were mentioning. So we're super excited about this opportunity. We've been wanting to do this for many years. So that is one excellent resource that we have now. And was there another?
Sorry, so I was just so I thought you were creating that position. That position already exists, and if so, who's that person?
Okay, his name is Tim Schaefer, and he works for Parks and Open Space, and we are literally just launching it right now. So you are welcome to get in touch with me, and we can sort of start talking. Definitely, that'd be great.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm excited about that. I mean, I know everybody thinks that I am only about this, but I really am about more than just this rainbow. And I really do think there are a lot of people who have these questions, and I'm very excited that this position is being created. So I appreciate that.
So are we. Thank you so much. Yes.
Great, thank you. Any other public comments, Nick?
Hi, can you all hear me?
Yes.
So just to clarify, is it all right if I like sort of give a comment as opposed to more of like a specific question?
Okay, can you state your name and your address?
Sure. This is Theo Kuhn. I live at 2815 West 42nd Ave in Denver.
Okay.
So I'm speaking on behalf of Front Range Eagle Studies. We study bald eagles and other raptors in Boulder County and Western Weld County. And I just want to start off by thanking Susan, Stefan, and David for presenting these recovery plans. I thought they were really interesting and really appreciate the effort put into them, and look forward to seeing more of them as they come out. I wanted to make a comment on species of special concern that are perhaps given slightly lower priority than the ones that were presented today, and maybe don't have these recovery plans developed yet, but are still absolutely in need of attention. As a raptor researcher, I'll speak to one species in particular, the ferruginous hawk, as an example. The ferruginous hawk is in decline in Boulder County. There's been a 90% decrease in survey numbers from the early 90s to the late 2010s. And it's recognized by the county as a species of special concern, but it doesn't yet have a countywide recovery plan. And I just wanted to emphasize how important it is that we don't disregard those declining numbers. Specifically, I wanted to stress that when opportunities to bring about greater protections arise, it's essential that the county take full advantage of those opportunities. Recent example was a bit of a missed opportunity on that front was the planning process at Carolyn Holmberg Preserve, and really appreciated like everyone here was involved in that. But during that process, ferruginous hawks that use that property were hardly mentioned, despite a lot of public input. Another example would be the recent annual meeting on the prairie dog habitat element, where no changes were proposed, despite, as you know, a whole lot of public input on prairie dog policy in the past year. So just to sum it up, wanted to stress the importance of proactively protecting all species of special concern, especially when management plans and policies are up for revision, because those are really important opportunities to not just acknowledge that these species are vulnerable, but shape open space management to help protect them in the face of development and agriculture. We look forward to continuing to share our data with you all on how best to protect the raptors that we study and the habitats that they rely on. Thanks.
Great. Thank you for your comment, Theo. Any other public comments? Okay, and I think Tony had one quick question.
Yeah, just a quick question, Susan and Stefan and David. Thank you. Great presentation. I'm just curious how many staff you all have. Like, what does that look like to staff this effort?
So wildlife staff, we have 5, and then we get a couple seasonals every year. Yeah.
Yeah, I have 5 full-time, but they do various jobs, and only 2 of them really related to planning in terms of looking for these, dealing with this issue.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah, I have 3 in a term position. It's been around for a while, and seasonals that come on in the summer, 2 to 3 seasonals typically. And honestly, not enough time with everything else on our plate to do much towards some of these things we would like to do more of.
Yeah, I can see that and sympathize with that, because there's a lot of habitat, a lot of area to monitor, to plan, to figure out. So thank you guys. I appreciate the hard work.
Great, great. Okay, well, we'll, in the interest of time, we'll move on. I want to thank you all for your excellent presentations, very informative, and it looks like you're doing incredibly good work. So with that, the next thing, yes.
I just want to interject. I'm just looking at the clock. We're at 8:26. We have 2 presentations left. One, they're both half-hour, I think. One's the Redbelly Dace project, and the other is an update on the Calwood fire. I do not want to overstay our welcome this evening, so I just want to see what your appetite is. If you want to keep us to our projected timeline of wrapping up around 9, we only have time for 1 presentation, and I would recommend that be the Calwood. If you want to indulge us and go long this evening, we can do both, but we can also postpone it to the next month's meeting and fit it in then. And I hate to do that to staff, but we've been running a little bit long, in part because of some of our presentations, in part because some of the great questions that you all have had. So just want to interject that now for a moment and figure out what our trajectory looks like for the rest of the evening.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Eric. I appreciate your respecting our time here. I'm okay either way. I guess maybe just to make it quick, if people can raise their hand, if they're okay going for the full agenda. Okay, it looks like we want to limit it to 1 then. So why don't we proceed with the Calwood fire update at that point? So it looks like Stefan and David are doing that presentation as well.
That's correct. Give me 1 second here. All right, can you see my screen?
Not yet.
Okay, there we go again.
There we go.
Okay,
coming to us. Yep.
And I'll try to move through. So again, Stefan Reynolds, Senior Forester, and I'm going to try to move through quickly because I know that I did present, to you guys a little bit of my thoughts right after the fire at a previous meeting. But I'm going to kind of move through this fairly quickly. So, obviously, this is a big thing that occurred, and a lot of the major efforts are going to be done and talked about by David. And what's going on post fire. But once again, we had a fire, 10,106 acres. This map was adjusted a little bit later. It's the biggest fire we've had in Boulder County's history. And so obviously very concerning. On this map, quickly, you can see roughly 4,400 acres is our land, is at Ohio Valley Ranch. An additional 1,300 acres are under conservation easement. So you can see Calwood, Ballarat, the Oaks properties, and some others located here. So obviously this affected open space in many ways. And then the additional acreage is U.S. Forest Service and then some private inholdings here and there. The one thing I would point out real quickly is this white area up here. That is actually state land board land, but that we lease and manage. So there's an additional 300 acres that burned in the footprint that we manage. So just wanted to point that out. So when a fire happens, they do a soil burn severity map. It's part of the BEAR process, and it identifies, where severe fire occurred. If you look at this map, the red is high severity, yellow moderate severity, low is blue, and green is unburned. And so the reason I want to show you this map is there are areas that really burned hot on Heil, and that's disturbing because we lost a lot of trees. But there are areas kind of right through the center here that we have less severity, and why is that? And we'd like to believe that it's because of the treatments that we've done. And so we have done a lot of treatment at Ohio Valley Ranch. We have done thinning, we have done mastication projects, we have done thinning followed by prescribed fire, we have done restoration style projects, and we've done prescribed fire straight up. The most recent project we completed last year was a helicopter logging project, which is this yellow section here and up to the ridge. Overlaying that on the map, what you can see is the areas that we've done treatment didn't have as high severity, and we believe that's because of that. Now, this location was the spot where we did mastication, and it has some high severity in there. There could be two reasons for that. It could be because when you do mastication, the fuel stays on the ground, so the latency of the fire on the ground can actually cause soil damage. The other reason could be that this could be where the actual fire front was, because we know that we lost homes over here. We know that the fire came through here pretty hot. So I just wanted to point that out there. So obviously we went out and we looked, and what we noticed is areas that received thinning and restoration style treatments and then were followed up by prescribed fire seem to be the areas that did the best. And there's a lot of research out there that says prescribed fire is one of the most important things because it takes away that fuel layer that's on the ground. And like I said, that latency of how long that fire is going to be on the ground is minimized. And so then less soil damage, less damage to the roots, and that as well. But we had some really good signs out there. And so in those areas, we have some good survival. It doesn't mean it's perfect. This is a spot that was treated and we lost everything. We think this is because of its location, where the fire came through the canyons, came up the ridge, and then laid down across a flat area and burned through. So again, some of this is pretty devastating to see. Here's a location where you really couldn't see this rock wall before the fire, and then it's clear as day. And this is one of the hardest hit locations up on the western portion of the property. Here's a couple just quick pictures of a location where we did some treatment, and then next to the Forest Service land where they didn't do treatment. Not to put blame, not to throw the Forest Service under the bus, it just happens to be the dividing line of treatment and non-treatment. So I just wanted you to see that we know that the fire the treatments affected fire behavior. We know that it decreased fire behavior. Did it stop the fire like we had hoped? No, but we do have some tree survival because of the work we did. Just another quick picture of that same area. This was on a corner lot, so this is kind of Again, showing you some survival in locations where we did treatments. Nick Strummel, one of my employees, and I got a chance to get up in a helicopter during the fire. While the fire was technically still active, but mostly under control. And we were able to see a lot of the different things on the landscape. This is down at the bottom here, just to this side here is where the Lichen Loop parking lot is. And you can see the old footprint of the Overland fire. And we think that's what led to some of the survival of the locations down here. That more open forest structure causes fire to go back down to the ground and do that. Another vantage point, look in the other direction. This was our most recent project, and we weren't as happy with how it fared during this fire. We feel like it took the brunt of this fire. We have some tree survival. We have some tree survival over here, but we lost a huge section right through here and up over the top. Where I was showing you earlier, where it kind of blew through a treatment area, that was up here, and it came all the way through and then hit this untreated area on the backside and caused more fire. But it starts to give you kind of the perspective of this north-south is where we did all of our treatment, and that's where we have some green left post-fire. On the contrary, looking to the west, this is the oaks, the in-holding there, and our land, and then Forest Service land. And if you look here, you can see just acres and acres and acres of complete tree loss. And the worrisome part about that is, of course, there's no seed source so this is going to be an opening on our landscape for a long time. Again, just another quick photo. This is right above, here's the Lichen Loop parking lot, and right above the parking lot, the old quarry up here. And again, we lost a lot of trees on this location. We also had a drone flight that was done by the commissioners. And again, you kind of look back and see there's where it popped through our treatment areas. But again, we have a lot of survival in here, and that's a good sign. The hillside of the ridge right above the property, again, another location of severe tree loss. I'm just going to go through these slides pretty quickly, but I told you we did that big Lichen Loop project, and this is what we had before, an after, and then an after fire. And this is what it used to look like density-wise. This is what it ended up after we treated it. So you can kind of see the openings and the big opening put here. And this is what it looks like after the fire. On this slide, you can see, again, we were trying to kind of create some openings and create space, and we did get some survival on the edge. One of the things that we were trying to save on this site were legacy trees. And I'm sure you guys have all heard the term old growth, and we don't like to use the term old growth in ponderosa pine forests because old growth describes a forest, not an individual tree. And people use that term trying to describe an individual tree, and it's not the same thing. However, these we call legacy trees because they are large, older trees that we want to preserve on the landscape to kind of get to a structure that could be considered old growth later on. But unfortunately, we mark these to save, and we save them, and then the fire actually, most of these trees in this location are going to die. And that's hard for us to see. Again, here's a couple more of those legacy style trees. What I wanted to show you on this one was to look across to the backside here. You can see how dense it was. We opened it up really good. And this, again, is one of the best locations we had for survival on this specific project. So what is forestry doing? Well, because we are the ones that know how to run saws and know how to fell trees, one of the first things we wanted to do was assist with, is there anywhere we can open up to the public? And we wanted to open up those upper loops. There was a third of I'm trying to remember the size. I think this is roughly ends up being a 3-acre opening, but it's just a little switchback on the wild turkey trail. And we felled these trees with the intent of utilizing them for the mulching efforts that David will talk about in a little bit. So these are actually laid out in a purposeful direction, so it's easier for the helicopter to move them out of the location. We assessed all the trails, and we identified 3.19 miles that needed hazard tree removals. So that's pretty extensive when you start to think in, what is a hazard tree? A tree that has a chance of falling on the trail because it's dead. And so that equates to 42 to 57 acres worth of trees that will need to be addressed. That is a significant amount and will take a significant amount of time. Of course, we put it on a map as well. And so that little tiny piece that that showed in the photo is this little section right here. Currently, we are working everywhere near the parking lot and in the lichen loop area. The forestry staff is. Just another photo here. So then this is my last slide, and it's basically just saying, well, what's next, right? So obviously we're going to continue doing hazard tree removals. But one of the things that occurs after a fire is trees don't die right away. Usually within that 3 to 5 years, there's an additional 30% of trees that will die in the area. And so we're going to have to think about, what do we do about future hazard trees? There's going to be insect and disease issues. Fires bring in mountain pine beetle, they bring in Ips beetle, and those are concerns because, again, you could lose green trees that survive the fire due to these insects coming into the area. And so we need to look at high value areas and think about verbenone pouches, which basically tell beetles that, hey, this tree's full, go somewhere else. And so that's a way to try to avoid beetles in area. In some areas, if we do some mastication, and David will mention that later, we might put out Ips traps, which stop Ips beetles from coming in, because Ips beetles like slash. So if there's a bunch of masticated material on the ground, Ips beetles can populate that material and then come out and attack live trees. So there's things that we're thinking about from that perspective. And then planting. Everybody wants to know, it's a great thing. I love tree planting. But the question always comes up to us, should we replant? And from our standpoint, there may be some locations that make sense for tree planting, but not on a landscape scale. We're not looking at replanting this 4,000 acres. We may look for strategic locations that are located up on ridges so that future seed source can come down. We may look at high value areas where there might be a need for some habitat for Susan. She might want some habitat in some location, and we want some trees back, so we can look at that. But the bottom line is, it is good to have this opening on the landscape now that we have it. One of the things missing from a forestry perspective on the landscape is openings. There should be close to 25% of the landscape in the lower montane forest should be in openings. And right now we're probably about 7 to 10%. So having an opening like this is not necessarily a bad thing. I hate to see homes lost during that fire. I hate to see the forest lost during that fire. But moving forward, what's the right move? And we think it's not to plant too many trees. So that's my little take. And then, like I said, we can save the questions until David's done.
Okay.
Good evening again. People see that?
Yes. Oh, we see your notes now.
I don't know why that. I'm more used to Teams than Zoom, I guess. Likes me to do it twice for some reason. How about now?
Yep, it's good.
Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the next steps up on the Calwood fire, particularly on Heil Ranch and some of the private lands associated with it. we've been here before. These pictures are from the Overland fire. The fire was in 2003. These mulching operations were in 2004 following some severe thunderstorms. So what are we concerned about? Well, Stefan shared this map, obviously, and it's really these moderate and high severity areas that are a concern. That light blue, the low severity, which is primarily areas, could be meadows, grasslands, shrublands, or thinned forest that just can't burn as hot as some of these dense forest areas are really not areas we would target for any of these stabilization recovery methods. So as you can imagine, these areas that burned hot lack any kind of vegetation, if they even had some to begin with, in some of the denser forest, understory vegetation. They also can have these hydrophobic soils, which are basically just water repellent soils. And that's just a factor of the high intensity heat that volatilizes some of the chemicals in the organic matter. And as that cools, it kind of turns into this waxy layer in the soil, anywhere from a half inch to a few inches deep, and just really prevents water from infiltrating that soil. You can see that drop there. Some places that drop would just soak right in. Other places it would just sit there for 10, 20 minutes or more until it evaporates. So the lack of vegetation and those water repellent soils, there's a few things, basically three things we're concerned about. One is just hill slope erosion. This is some modeling done by the Colorado Forest Restoration Institute. And this is a 2-year storm event. And it really mimics that burn severity. The red areas are really in the high severity areas. Probably slope is the other big factor in this map too. And this is thinking about the soil on the slopes, losing that soil on the slopes, the fine sediment and the ash. You're gonna lose that growing medium, and it's gonna end up going down the drainages and into the streams and down to some of our water users and irrigation users. One of the primary concerns here is left-hand water. You can see my cursor. Left-hand water has their main intake. It's their only intake for, I think, 6 or 7 months of the year for 21,000 water users. Is about 300 yards downstream of Gear Creek when it meets Left-Hand Creek. So that's of a great concern. The other part of this is just debris flows. If you get a big enough rain event, these are these larger events, rocks, trees, the mudslides that you might see in Southern California following a fire. And this is some mapping done after they do that burn severity map. The U.S. Geological Survey comes in and does this modeling for debris flows. And I'll orient you here a little bit, but this kind of gray line trending southwest to northeast right here is kind of the ridge. Things on this side is the Central Gulch side that drains down into the South St. Vrain, and everything on this east side drains into Gear Creek and down into Left-Hand Creek. So you can see we have some high probability basins for debris flows on the Central Gulch side, but we have this huge central area on the Gear Creek side, which is primarily Heil Ranch at a high probability for debris flows. And you can look at that as in a segment version too, and even pinpoint some areas like right here that are even 80 to 100% probability. Here's a few that are right above our current upper trailhead that are pretty high probability. And then they can add volume into this as well and come up with an overall hazard. But the same general consensus comes out that this central part of Heil, Gear Creek, is very red. Here's some additional mapping that the Colorado Geologic Survey did following the flood in Boulder and Larimer counties. Actually, I don't know if I think it was right after the flood, where they mapped the potential for landslides. And you can see some here. Again, our trailhead is right here, our upper trailhead. Some crossing Gear Canyon up near our ranger's residence and up to the Oaks homes. And what's interesting here is they also mapped these down here, which is down near our Corral trailhead on the lower part of Heil. And this is almost identical to what happened following the Overland fire, where we had debris flows cross the roads in almost these exact same spots as what they modeled later. So that, shows that this could be fairly accurate assessment of what could happen. And here's some shots from the Overland fire. So the Overland fire, I think that was also maybe an October fire in 2003. The following June, we had a thunderstorm. I don't remember the rainfall rate exactly, but it washed down, significant amounts of soil and ash. We didn't own the lower part of Heil at that point, so this was the Heil cattle stock pond filled up with soil and ash. And you can see Gear Creek running black, and significant erosion on the hillside above the trailhead, the Corral trailhead. This is just one rain event, and causing gullies 6-7 feet deep. And all that rock goes somewhere, so that came out down slope, across the fields, across the access roads, across Gear Canyon Road, impacted culverts, things like that. And then the third thing we're concerned about is just increased stream flows. When you don't have that vegetation there, you don't have the canopy of the trees to, break up the rainfall. You don't have the infiltration of the soils you might have had pre-fire, or the vegetation on the ground just to slow that flow off the hillsides. You really increase the flow of water coming down into the creeks. And these numbers are CFS, cubic feet a second, which may be a little bit hard for folks to imagine. And it shows kind of a 1-year rain event, 2-year, 10-year, up to 50-year. But I'll draw your attention to this 10-year at Gear Creek, down here right before it gets to left hand, almost 1,000 CFS. And this is, I don't know, put in perspective, it's like the main stem of the St. Vrain, like West Alliance or East Alliance, on a good snowpack year in May, when the river's really ripping, we're kind of around 1,000 CFS, anywhere from 800 to 1,200. So that's a lot of water coming down a very small stream here at Heil. And that basically is, and they also, after the 2013 flood, when they estimated flows through Gear Creek, they estimated those flows at just over 1,000 CFS, and that was a 100-year event. So the modeling shows that post-fire now, with what's out there on the ground or what's not out there on the ground, a 10-year rainfall event is equivalent to a 100-year event. And we know what the 2013 flood did. It washed out Gear Canyon Drive in multiple places for about 1.5 miles. That was a total rebuild by our Public Works Department to get that back and operating. So what are we going to do? What are we going to do on the ground? What are our priorities? I'll just say we've been working with a lot of stakeholders, Forest Service, City of Longmont, Left Hand Water, CWCB, and different county departments, Office of Emergency Management, Public Works. And really the one I'll call your attention to is the NRCS, because they have the Emergency Watershed Protection Program. And that funding is specifically for things just like this. We've used them on the past fires recovery, 4 Mile Fire, the Overland Fire. We used that funding for a lot of our flood recovery as well. So that's who we've been primarily working with to secure funding to move forward with what we're proposing to do. There's multiple things you can do. There's hill slope treatments, seeding, obviously, and mulching. You can use agricultural straw, wood shreds, hydro mulch. You can do these log erosion barriers, try to trap sediment up on the hillside. These are all hill slope treatments. And there's also like channel treatments that you could do in some of the upper drainages. You wouldn't do something like this in Gear Creek itself. That would just blow out, but in some of the higher elevation or higher watershed canyons, you could do different things like this: straw bale check dams or rock check dams or log debris catchment things. And so really the literature and the research over the past couple of decades has really pointed to the single best thing you can do is to get mulch on the ground and to get it down quickly before the first year of rain events. Here's just a quick graphic from the High Park fire up in Larimer County. That was like 2012. I think at one point it was the largest fire in the state. It's since been well overshot by multiple fires this last year. And you can see the significant decrease in sediment coming off the hillsides between the mulched area and the unmulched, especially in that first year. Less significant in the second year. And some of this is due because that was a pretty dry year, so there wasn't a lot of rainfall. And then the third year, not much change. It's kind of interesting that the mulch even had more erosion than the unmulched at that point. And seeding, on the other hand, has kind of fallen out of favor. Seeding is really, it's that first year is so critical to rely on seeding, even if you're lucky enough to get the seed to germinate and establish. You know, it's going to be little seedlings, especially native grasses and such. There's going to be little seedlings, very small root system. It's not going to have that established root system. So it's not going to be enough to hold that soil in place. And this is showing that on some fires in New Mexico, comparing this wallow fire, you know, unseeded versus seeded, no difference. Second year, a little bit of a difference, but still not much. And it's fairly similar on this Trigo fire, which didn't have much rainfall that year either, but not much of a significant difference. And we found that on our own research too, following the 4 Mile fire. But I'm going to skim over this one. So prioritizing what we're going to do, most of these treatments, this mulching treatment in particular, is really effective on slopes between 20 and 60%. Excuse me, less than 20, we're not too concerned. Those slopes aren't as prone to erosion. Greater than 60, it's, you know, a lot of times that's rock cliffs, or it could be steep slopes, but your treatment may not just stay in place on slopes that steep. So we could overlay the severity burn index with the slopes and come up with another map. And that table there on the right kind of shows some acreages that would fall under that categories of 20 to 60% slope and moderate and high severity burns. And then the background of this map, that red and orange, it's similar to the burn severity, but that is areas that are high and moderate burn severity within those slopes. And so you can see, and these are our proposed mulching polygons. And you can see we're actually capturing a lot of what's burned and steep on Howe Ranch. The green are parks and open space. The blue are private properties, primarily the Oaks residences up here. And then the Calwood Education Center over on the west end. Oh, and then some here above the Mountain Ridge subdivision as well. The purple and the light blue are kind of a secondary priority. That's what that looks like on Google Earth, kind of looking west. Our trailheads, upper trailheads right here. Gear Canyon goes up here. Our ranger residence is about here. So then I should say, and maybe I could back up to all these areas you're seeing that are, hey, these are really red, nothing happening. These are Forest Service lands. And the EWP funding from the NRCS does not allow us to use that money on federal lands. So we can only target, you know, local government, county, state, and private parcels. Hence why those are left off. We are pursuing some additional funding for these with some of those stakeholders. And so we'll see how that moves forward. And this is what that looks like on the ground. This is from the Overland fire. This is straw. This time we're proposing to use wood. And that's been another shift lately. The Forest Service has really moved away from agricultural straw too. 2 reasons. One, it can introduce weed seeds. You can get weed-free straw, but it's not necessarily weed-free, even if it's certified as such. And it also moves in the wind, and we know how windy the Front Range can be. So it can get displaced, and then it's not as effective. So these pilots are pretty amazing. They can drop this stuff and really get this great coverage on the slopes. This is it kind of falling down, even through all the trees. And you get this pretty even, consistent cover. And we're looking for 70% cover. That's a specification typically. You know, more than 60 is what they like to see to be effective. So we'll be out there monitoring it while they're dropping or after they drop and kind of signing off each of these areas and being in communication with the pilots and such. But we'll run some transects and make sure we're getting the coverage as needed. So we're planning on using trees on site. Stefan mentioned the hazard tree removal, so that'll be a source of wood both at Heil and up at Calwood. And then we have some other areas that were not mulching, kind of on flatter ground that had that high severity burn where we can harvest some trees. But the contractor is going to be responsible for sourcing some additional material to cover all the acreage we're proposing to do, which I think is about 1,350 acres of aerial mulching. And then maybe 280 acres of mastication. Mastication is quite a bit cheaper, and there's a few slopes that are accessible by the machinery. So we proposed a few locations to do that on as a kind of a cost savings. We're also proposing to do some debris and sediment capture. These are some structures that were kind of built after the 4 Mile fire. These steel ones to protect culverts. This one over here on the right kind of deflects debris around a home that's down here. And then some real low budget stuff. This one doesn't look like it trapped much in this drainage, but there were other ones that were kind of successful at trapping debris behind them that volunteers could build or staff. And then we're proposing one larger sediment basin. So we have this area at the confluence of 2 pretty major watersheds. If you're familiar with Heil, it's kind of this area in the outlet of Plumley and Marietta Canyons. It was really impacted by the flood. So it's very disturbed now. And we think we could do a little bit of grading work here and some engineering and build kind of a catchment basin here that would catch a lot of that sediment before it gets down into the stream. And then if we need to, we have to excavate that as part of our operations and maintenance for the NRCS funding. Much like we did the stock pond on the Hiles back in 2004. When that filled up, we excavated it, they got their stock pond back. We actually used this material, which is a great growing medium, and kind of graded out all those rocks you saw, top dressed it and seeded it, and kind of have a meadow back in some of those areas. So the funding, we work with the NRCS. They look at values at risk. What you're spending has to be less than what you're protecting. Let me get rid of that. So we have homes at risk from flooding in the stream crest neighborhood, or debris flows from the remaining homes on the North Foothill subdivision or the Mountain Ridge subdivision. We got this left-hand water supply, significant roads and trailhead infrastructure, and we even looked at like a loss of visitor use, found some literature that equated to a 1 week of lost visitors at Howe Valley Ranch and Calwood Education Center. Total about 16.5 million. And then what we proposed recovery measures, you can see different things here. The mulching, almost 1,500 acres here, I guess, is by far the biggest piece of that ask. It's not cheap. The aerial mulching using helicopters and wood shreds is not inexpensive. And then we have other things in here, like I mentioned, the channel treatments, as well as something I haven't mentioned, updates to rain gauges and the emergency warning system that our Office of Emergency Management is working on, and the National Weather Service and folks like that. That was a real interest to CDOT, to City of Longmont, and Left Hand Water, so they can be warned to shut off their intakes if necessary. So the next steps, contracting out aerial mulching. And I know Ann asked earlier, that RFP went out today. We just had our pre-bid meeting with contractors. So we had about 15 different vendors show up. These guys come in from all over. Some flew in from Arizona, Idaho, Utah, where they have these big, helicopter logging operations. So we had a pretty good response. Those bids are due March 8th. And then we'll make a selection and get that moving. We would hope to get most of this. We'd love to get this working on the ground in April and May, and have these treatments in place before the summer thunderstorm season. So that's the goal. And then I just want to close on, people, every fire we have, people are like, oh my God, it looks so bad. It's never going to come back. It's terrible, devastation. And it's true, the trees aren't going to come back, or it's going to take a real long time for them to come back in this Front Range climate of ours. But vegetation does come back. And these are some slides following the 4 Mile fire, post-fire, first year, second year, and third year. And you can see even the first year, a lot of stuff came up. It's a little weedy, but I think actually some of these red weeds are native chenopode. There's species that just preferentially come up after disturbance like that. Year 2, it's looking better. Year 3, it's looking like a pretty nice meadow, really. So things do respond even in the worst of circumstances. And here's even an example from Howe Ranch back in November. After a snow following the fire in these meadows, the grass was already greening up and coming back. So there's some hope there. And I think what I really like about this image, and like the point I like to drive home, is we do a lot of these treatments. Obviously the forest treatments that Stefan's group does is to protect, health and human safety, infrastructure for one, and secondly, to protect the forest, so don't lose all the trees like we do in some of these untreated areas. I think the often overlooked other success story about that is if you have a thin forest, you get some understory vegetation growing under there. And when you do have a fire, that vegetation, it's already got an established root system, it rebounds right away and comes back. And you really don't have to do all these measures that you may have to do otherwise, and spend all this money to keep your soil in place and protect things downstream. So I think that's kind of overlooked in those common conversations, but it's a huge component and just really shows the value of doing some of those forest treatments. So I guess we can take some questions.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to go ahead and start. I have a couple questions. One is, what is mastication? That came up a couple times.
Yeah, I can answer that one.
Go
So basically, a masticator is like a tree lawnmower. So basically, it shreds the material and sends it flying, and it leaves chunks that could be, some can be up to 4 feet wide, or long, but it shreds it and just spreads it out all over the place. And it's time consuming, but not as expensive as other methods.
Okay. And then why do insects come into an area that's been burned like that? Is it the stress on the trees that they've undergone, or?
Exactly. It's all stress related. Trees give off scents and the pheromones that the insect catches onto. They come to the area. It's the same reason why there'll be a lot of beneficial insects that will show up as well. Wood borers that help turn it into soil.
Okay, good. And then a last question probably for David is, if it's only mulching and no seeding, how do the grasses, you talked about underground root structure, but that's probably for the woody vegetation. How do the grasses get going again?
They're there in the seed bank, and they just, typically they'll come back. If not the first year, but you saw in some of those photos, second, third year. Surprisingly, even where you didn't think there was stuff existing, many of those come back.
So even in hydrophobic soils, they haven't been burned out completely.
Yeah, and those hydrophobic soils do break down over time. Even though with this winter helps, that freeze-thaw cycle, it definitely helps that. So. Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, I'll open it up to any questions from other POSAC members. Any others? Okay. Nick, is there any questions from the public?
Asked to speak, and Richard is also asked to share his screen. Richard, would you still like to do that?
No, that's not necessary. I'm going to be very brief given the hour.
Great. Give your name and your address, Richard, and yeah, if you can keep it brief, that'd be very
sure.
Very grateful. Okay.
I've been on those sides of the tables for many years. Rich Lopez, 8034 Left Hand Canyon Drive, Jamestown, Colorado. I'm the president of the Calwood Education Center. And I would be remiss if I didn't ask that we use the correct spelling of Calwood. It's CAL-WOOD. And the reason is the Calvert family and the Wood family donated this land 38 years ago, and it's owned by a trust called the Pilot Trust. Calwood's gotten more PR than they ever wanted, believe me. And, but I really want to emphasize that we use the correct name. We cooperated extensively with the fire investigators because, as you know, the fire originated on Calwood's property. And we were very disappointed that the investigators were unable to determine the cause, whether it was man-made or natural. It still remains a mystery. So to that effort, and we're going to be working in the future to try to study how wildfires impact lands like Calwood. We are one of the stakeholders, and fortunately we'll be working with the county. I think Area 1 is the Calwood area, approximately 218 acres that will be part of this project to cut the wood and use the masticators. Calwood has spent decades trying to mitigate its property, and we didn't have the funds available to the county, but we still were able to do a pretty good job on quite a few acres. And I would invite the POSAC board up to take a look at Calwood, because you can see where mitigation actually did work and where areas that weren't mitigated were destroyed. We're at the upper end of the watershed, so we too are very concerned about the spring runoff and are going to be taking steps to try to mitigate that by preventing the loss and trying to prevent the loss of the topsoil, which is going to go into the creeks. So we are participating. We're looking forward to working with the county. We're seeking funding from other organizations and agencies to try to treat Calwood and try to restore it in the future. As you may know, we provide education programs to school children throughout Colorado. And because of the pandemic, we've been able to have children up there, except for day programs. But once again, we thank you for the cooperation. As a stakeholder, we're looking forward to working with the county. And if you really want to see how mitigation works on other property that's not county open space, contact us and we'd love to show it to you. Thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your comment. Go ahead.
Can I address this one question about, the naming convention is the U.S. Forest Service decides what a fire is named. And I was actually there and told them that it was Calwood, but whatever stuck on their websites and their information is just without the hyphen. So I apologize.
I'm just referring to your memos. If you look at your memos, they're not spelled correctly either.
And it's because we have to stay in line with what the actual fire is called.
Okay.
Yep.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Richard. Appreciate your comments there. Any other POSAC comments, or I guess Nick first? Is there anyone else from the public? Okay. Any final POSAC comments?
Yeah, Scott. Hey, one thing I just had a question about. You guys were talking about your aerial mulching and the mastication stuff. Have you guys looked at all? I know through the NRCS and agriculture, there's a lot of talk about using like polyacrylamides to cut down soil erosion and that type of thing. Have you guys looked at that at all? Is that viable in helping on those fire damaged areas?
You said polyacrylamides?
Yeah.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it a lot. It's I don't think it's been proven as effective. And I think cost might be an issue too. I'm not sure. I'd have to do some more research on it, but I think over a large area like that, it may be a little bit difficult to implement over such a large acreage in a cost-effective manner.
Gotcha.
Great. Any other questions, comments? All right, seeing none, we'll go ahead. Thank you both very much for your very good presentation on it. It's a huge effort you've got in front of you, so thanks for your work. And now we'll turn to the director's update.
Great, thank you, Paula. And before I forget, thanks for managing while Jim was out getting COVID proved. Much appreciated. So quick updates, kind of a smorgasbord. Raptor nest volunteer monitors are on board. We have at least 2 bald eagle nests in the region that are already starting to incubate, which is a little early, including the one at Stearns Lake. We also approved 4 small research grants for a total of $40,000 for 2021 research. This year, 3 projects are going to be looking at the Calwood fire. One will look at treated areas and burns severity. One will look at cheatgrass response to fire. And then the other will look at soil carbon stocks after fire. And then the 4th one is to continue a long-term bat research that we've been supporting on parks and open space properties. Switching to the fairgrounds, fairgrounds are finally going to start having a little limited public use. Most of it, as you probably know, have been used for COVID purposes and also for farmers markets. But the county's recovery team has approved gathering of 10 individuals or less for groups that will adhere to our standard safety guidelines. So open ride will begin on March 3rd and barrel racing will begin on March 4th. And our staff will be monitoring open ride throughout the event to make sure that there are no more than 10 riders in the building at one time. And then barrel racing is going to have a sign up. So there'll be no more than 8 racers in the building plus 2 producers. And discussions will start next week on the potential for reopening the campground and perhaps increasing events to 25 people in April. So we're starting to see a little positive movement and life return to the fairgrounds. Today, if you were watching our Facebook page, you know that we burned some forestry slash piles at Hall Ranch. It's been a really dry winter. So this is the first day we've been able to get out and do that, I think. Looking towards the future, in preparation for spring break, our education outreach team is creating web-based family scavenger hunts for Batasso, Mud Lake, and Legion Park. And as a follow-up to some of the work that we've done with you, we're going to be delivering to the board an IGA that formalizes our relationship with the cities of Louisville and Lafayette for the design and construction of the 104th Street Trail that will connect Coal Creek and Rock Creek trails. And the general gist of it is that Louisville will take the lead on selecting design and construction firms. We expect trail design to begin around May or June. That'll take 9 to 12 months. It'll include stakeholder meetings with adjacent property owners, including our own ag operations tenants. And construction is generally forecast to begin in early 2022. And also coming before the board in March, but we don't have a date yet, is a hearing on the FLAP grant, the Federal Lands Access Program grant for the Rocky Mountain Greenway on the south edge of the county. And lastly, I wanted to mention that I think it's been a while since we've talked about it, but the board had approved funding for conducting a fairgrounds master plan. And we put that process on hold because of COVID. And we are keeping it on hold until we get to a point where we feel we can really have a robust public engagement, because that is a hallmark of what that process is going to look like. So we're going to keep watching COVID, and I think we're kind of hopeful that in the fall, we'd be able to really launch that project. And then lastly, I just want to remind POSAC and the public, if they're interested, we've got our annual retreat coming up. It's going to be next Saturday via Zoom from 8:30 to noon 30. Renata will be getting you the details. Please note, especially for the public, the first 45 minutes will be an executive session that's closed to the public, so we can review real estate matters. And then the public session will start at around 9:15 a.m. on next Saturday, the 6th. And that's what I got.
Great. Thanks very much. Well, any other final comments? Otherwise, we will adjourn. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks.
All right. Good night.